Chapter 1638. The lips of the always youthful and elegant Immortal curled up. Can you tolerate me drawing seals so openly? In the eyes of the Liang soldiers who did not have outstanding martial cultivation, dozens of King of Baliang appeared in the square in the blink of an eye. In another blink, there were more than 100 people. The 1,000 or so soldiers of the Li family who had not been knocked unconscious were all dumbstruck and could only stare. Deep in their hearts, these Liang elites had complicated feelings. They were more wary and fearful of the arrogant and domineering young king, but their hatred was less. It seemed absurd, but the logic was actually very simple. In the early days of the Jianghu, how many beauties in the world did not love Li Chungang? How many martial artists in the world did not revere Wang Xianji? To be with them and live in the world, as long as it did not involve irreconcilable personal grudges, most people would yearn to be with them. Li Yang's reverence for martial power was based on iron hooves and knives. Qi Jiajia was dressed in white, so why was he able to become the teacher of so many dragon descendants in Great Peace City? Why did the Tangxi sword Immortal Lu Baijie make an exception and enter the capital to become the Minister of War and fill the streets with cheers? Recently, a shocking piece of news spread. It was said that the young king of Baliang had once fought alone with the Baimang military god Tuoba Bodhisattva in the western regions and fought until the sky turned dark. No matter what the scholars and civil officials of Great Peace City thought, men who were paid by the soldiers would talk about such things. It was most likely that the young King Su was just bragging and creating momentum for his trip to the capital. But no matter what the truth was, most of the martial artists in the army would feel some regret. They would wonder why the Su Fengnian did not simply kill that Tuoba Bodhisattva in the western regions. If he had really taken his head, then they, who lived off the soldiers of the emperor, would just be a bit more virtuous when they scolded him in the future. On the contrary, the Li family's armored soldiers had initially revered the immortal who treated human lives like grass, but they quickly developed a sense of enmity. Su Fengnian had killed hundreds of armored cavalry in one go on the street. It was true that his methods were ruthless, but the heavy cavalry of unknown origin had suddenly turned into golden-armored immortals. Such an immortal's method was really too chilling. Originally, when facing a strong enemy, we martial artists would treat it as a trip to the battlefield. If we died in battle, then so be it. But if we died for no reason, how sullen would that be? Where would there be heroism? Probably no one would die in peace. On the high wall, Luo Yang held the wine pot with 2 fingers. She smiled and said, Chao Chongqing cannot interfere, but you, Dong Tai, you have some relations with him. Are you just going to watch here? There was no one nearby. Dong Tai was not the kind of person who liked to pretend to be an expert. At this time, he was squatting at Chao Chongqing's feet. He said unhappily, that fart of connections. Back in the Eastern Sea, they were all used up. Chao Chongqing joked, don't make things difficult for our peach blossom sword god. Of course, I cannot interfere in this fight. But in fact, no one can. Just like yesterday at the Maui post station. In the end, it was just me and Dong Tai against one. But I think you, Luo Yang, also know that at our position, numbers don't mean much. Of course, face is also very important. Dong Tai seemed to remember something. In terms of connections, that elusive ancestor Lu should be the one helping, right? Luo Yang hesitated for a moment, then said, that person was to Gao Tingshu, just like Wang Xianji was to Li Chungang. And now, he is to Wang Xianji. So, who's next? Even Dong Tai was stunned. He turned to glance at Chao Chongqing. The latter nodded slightly. Dong Tai was suddenly angry. He cursed for the first time. Damn it, why is this kid so miserable? Was he supposed to be subdued by Ancestor Lu's reincarnation? Luo Yang said sarcastically, what do you think? Then, Luo Yang glanced at the sky. The cycle of the heavenly Tao is clear. Xiao Chongqing said slowly, since Ancestor Lu could even withdraw from the heavenly gate, he might not act according to this logic. Dong Tai sneered. What a good might not. Luoyang smiled and said, you're not happy. Dong Tai took a deep breath. Forget it. Even if I was willing to help, that kid wouldn't be willing. Luoyang drank a mouthful of wine. Her expression was calm. That's true. Dong Tai suddenly stood up. He shook his wrist and said in a deep voice, Su Fengnian will settle the grudge of the imperial astronomer himself. Dying here is his fate. Anyway, if he survives today, his future might not be good. But Xia Guining, that nimble old rabbit, Dong Tai, will properly pursue him this time. After passing Xiangfan City in Qingzhou, one would reach the middle and lower reaches of the Guangling River. A young Taoist priest and his disciples sat cross-legged on the riverbank. The little Taoist boy began to doze off as he pondered. The young Taoist priest didn't reprimand him. Every time the little Taoist was about to fall, he would reach out and support him. This young Taoist priest in plain robes was Li Yufu, Wudong's current leader. He brought his disciple Yufu along the Guangling River to escort the arowana into the sea. Suddenly, Li Yufu's body trembled. He heard two words softly, Yufu. Li Yufu slowly turned his head and saw a young Taoist priest sitting beside him with a warm smile. The Taoist priest and his disciple Yufu sat on Li Yufu's left and right. Li Yufu's eyes were filled with tears. He was about to stand up and bow. The man quickly waved his hand and said, Don't. We don't do this on the mountain. But Li Yufu still insisted on standing up. He was respectful and choked with sobs. I'm Li Yufu. Greetings to the young martial uncle. The young Taoist priest who was called young martial uncle by Li Yufu looked helpless. You're just like senior brother Yu. I'm afraid of you. When we were on the mountain, even the eldest senior brother who was in charge of discipline was not as particular as senior brother Yu. At that time, His Royal Highness would give out books after beating people. Well, you know, the kind with more pictures than words. Every time eldest senior brother found it, he would not throw it away. Only senior brother Yu would pull my ear and scold me when he found it. So, Yufu, if you meet a young Taoist priest on the mountain who secretly hides such books, just scold him. Don't beat him. It's okay if you really want to beat him, but remember to tell him that when you are successful in cultivation, you will return the books to him. That's what eldest senior brother told me. You see, didn't I become successful in the end? Li Yufu raised his arm and wiped his eyes. He smiled knowingly. The young martial uncle of Wudong Mountain was Li Yufu's young martial uncle. Then it could only be Hong Shixiang who rode a green ox and smiled when he met people. The young martial uncle looked at the torrential Guangling River across the central plains. He was lost in thought for a moment and then said, I had no choice but to leave in a muddy water. This time, other than wanting to say hello to you personally, I also want to borrow your sword. Li Yufu didn't look confused at all. He just nodded solemnly. Hong Shixiang looked up at the sky. I didn't go that year, and I won't go in the future. So, I have to trouble you with that matter. Li Yufu's eyes were clear and firm. Don't worry, young martial uncle. The two stood up together. Hong Shixiang patted Li Yufu's shoulder and smiled. You're more responsible than me. If only you went up the mountain earlier. I'll definitely lend you the books. Li Yufu smiled. There was no thought of the tall image of young martial uncle collapsing in his mind. This kind of young martial uncle was exactly his young martial uncle. Li Yufu took the peachwood sword from his back and handed it to young martial uncle. Hong Shixiang took the peachwood sword and looked down at the little Taoist boy. He suddenly said to Li Yufu, Yufu, don't be confused by the word longevity in cultivation. You can't be an immortal wholeheartedly. Help me tell this to myself. Li Yufu replied, I will. Hong Shixiang gently threw the ordinary Wudang peachwood sword into the Guangling River. He smiled gently. I've been cultivating for 800 years, and I've never taken anyone's head with a flying sword. Let's go. The moment Hong Shixiang threw the peachwood sword, thunder rumbled and the momentum suddenly overwhelmed the river waves. It was as if a celestial was sitting high in the clouds and shouting to the human world. Lu Dongxian, how dare you? Hong Shixiang looked up and laughed. I've been bold for 800 years. The peachwood sword that was still in the scabbard first hovered on the river surface for a moment and then disappeared in a flash. The celestial above was suddenly silent. Li Yufu looked at the river surface and did not turn his head. Young martial uncle left. 3 feet of spirit. 1,000 years of elegance. Chapter 1639. Previously, the hundreds of golden-armored knights had charged with a bright aura like the sun rising in Great Peace City. Then, the first ancestral master of Dragon Tiger Mountain drew seals on the Yulei ancient sword, and it was like the moon rising. Those Jianghu masters who were lucky enough to get close to the imperial astronomer were all amazed. However, most of the martial arts grandmasters of Liang, who had been hiding in the abyss, were cautious about this inexplicable change. They did not dare to get too close to the imperial astronomer. Some of the grandmasters who had sensed the danger even began to take the initiative to retreat, fearing that they would be implicated. It should be noted that about 60 years ago on Mount Longhu, thousands of people had witnessed the unexpected disaster when the great immortal Qi Xuanzhen ascended in broad daylight. The scene was still vivid in the minds of the older generation of Jianghu legends. No one knew how many masters had their qi momentum severely damaged when the great immortal Qi Xuanzhen was killed. However, compared to the demon execution platform of the Taoist Master Mansion, the Imperial College was a top-level important place in the capital. Most of the people of Jianghu were blocked outside by the heavily guarded Imperial Guards. These Liang elites were even able to ride their horses in the area between the Imperial College and the inner city under the urgent orders of the Ministry of War to prevent too many outsiders from getting close to the Imperial astronomer. Also, the few remaining copper fish bag masters of the Ministry of Justice moved out in full force and tried to reason with the famous Jianghu masters. If they really couldn't do it, they didn't care about the relationships they had built up over the years and just threw away all pretense of cordiality. If they didn't leave this place, then they would have to go to the Ministry of Justice's prison. Even so, there were still 20 to 30 Master Realm Masters who managed to get close to the Imperial Astronomer. They could even clearly see the figures of Dong Tai, Chao Chongqing, and Luo Yang on the high wall not far away. When they reached this area, the Imperial Guards and the Copper Fish Bag Masters of the Ministry of Justice didn't care. The orders from above were that they only needed to record the names and sects of these Jianghu people who didn't follow the rules. There was no need to fight with them. Afterwards, the Ministry of War and the Ministry of Justice would use military force to chase them out of the city. They wouldn't be able to enter Great Peace City for the next 10 years. Everyone liked being able to watch a show without spending money, but not everyone had the confidence to join in the fun at the feet of the Emperor and the Dragon Throne. These 30 or so Jianghu bigwigs, excluding the 10 or so people who had left on their own accord, and the 8 or 9 pitiful insects who had fainted due to the Imperial Astronomer's astonishing qi, there were still 10 or so people who were bitterly persevering. They were all standing on the eaves of the roof or on the top of the wall, not too far away. Most of the qi in their bodies was surging like a river, and their complexions were not good. As for those meaningless acts of clapping and cheering, it was even more impossible for them to appear at this time and place. Firstly, their status and position were there, and it was not appropriate for them to be startled. Secondly, the imposing manner of the Imperial Astronomer was too swift and fierce. It was already not easy for them to stand firm, so how could they pretend to pass judgment on the world? After Chai Ching-shan of the Dongyue Sword Pool and his 2 disciples tossed the 8 or 9 unlucky fellows far away, they came to the roof of a restaurant. A young girl in white, who carried so many swords on her back that she looked like a sword seller, stood beside her master. This young beauty from a famous sect, with her fluttering white clothes, already had the demeanor of a fairy. The young man, Song Tinglu, who only had a long sword, threw an unconscious burly man to a group of Imperial Army cavalry with a dark face. Panting, he returned to the side of his master and junior sister and complained, "If you have the strength, you should just hit a few kilograms of iron. I really don't know what these fellows were thinking. If it weren't for us cleaning up the mess, they would have really died here. Decades of hard work in cultivation, and they lost their lives for no reason. Is it worth it?" Chai Ching Shan did not expel the sect leaders, or itinerant immortals who were considered famous in the Liang River Lake. He chuckled softly and said, "This kind of risky action seems absurd and laughable, but it is actually in accordance with the rules of Jianghu. When they leave Great Peace City and go to the counties, they can tell others about this unprecedented battle and tell others that they were only a few feet away from the king of Beiliang. Just imagine how much glory it will bring to them. When you are in Jianghu, especially when you have reached a certain height, the superficial things are sometimes more useful than the reputation you earned with your fists. For example, the day before yesterday, I chatted with Liu Baijie, the sword immortal of Tangxi, who was the Minister of War. Yesterday, I had a sword discussion with Mr. First, Qi Jiajie. Today, I saw the king of Beiliang fight with my own eyes. Which of his moves were truly profound, and which of his moves were actually similar to my own sex guarding skills? These are all golden signboards, and great topics of conversation that can sway the minds of the listeners." The young man pointed at the imperial astronomer who was still far away from them and rolled his eyes. "That's only a few feet away. It's almost 2 miles away. Lord Chao, the peach blossom sword deity, and the white-clothed devil, the 3 great grandmasters, don't even dare to say that they are only a few feet away from the imperial astronomer, okay? Can these people be any more shameless?" Song Tingla's voice was not soft. Not far away, the youngest of the Jianghu seniors who were already in their 40s heard him clearly. However, none of them blushed. They either crossed their arms over their chests or clasped their hands behind their backs and stood at a high place. They still had the demeanor of a great grandmaster. Chai Ching Shan reached out his hand and pressed it on the young man's head. He smiled bitterly and said, "You don't know how expensive oil and salt are until you are in charge. In the future, when Master is no longer here, you will be the head of the Donghua sword pool. You will know that the words you said today might not be able to buy back a favor even if you spend hundreds of thousands of taels of silver." Song Tingla carefully glanced at his junior sister. The latter made a face and said loudly, "I don't want to be the sect leader. You can be the sect leader. I want to be chivalrous and walk the Jianghu like that Su Fingnian. As long as he has walked through the provinces, climbed the famous mountains, and entered the restaurants and tea houses, I want to walk through them all." Song Tingla's lips moved slightly, but in the end, he could not say a single harsh word. Was it true that behind every junior sister who was moved by love and did not hesitate, there was a senior brother who was her childhood sweetheart who was secretly sad? Chapter 1640. Chai Ching Shan suddenly reached out and grabbed Shan Yi and Song Tinglu. He said in a deep voice, "Aside from winning reputation, you can also use the opportunity to practice martial arts. The key is whether you can calm down and comprehend the heavenly Tao. It's not without reason that Martial Emperor City was so lively back then. Xianyuan Qingfeng set up a father-son game and a grandfather-grandson game on the snowfield. Why were there so many people watching? It's actually very simple. There are opportunities in it. Next, if Chao Dengluo and the other 2 fight, you must open your eyes wide to see the essence of it. It will be very beneficial for your martial arts cultivation in the future. Among them, Dong Tai's fight is the most important. After all, this peach blossom sword god is very likely to use his sword today. Whatever master knows, he will definitely teach you. You will definitely be able to learn it. It's just a matter of time. However, to witness Deng Tea's sword with your own eyes, this might be the only time in your lives. The girl seemed to not care about her future at all. She asked with a heartless smile, Master, he will definitely win, right? Chai Ching-shan subconsciously looked at the cloudless sky and murmured, God knows. Song Tingla began to count in his heart. Han Xingxian, Wang Xianji, Sui Xiegu, Qi Jiajie, Chao Changqing, Dong Tai. He knew of these fights, but Su Fengnian either won or tied. He actually didn't lose a single fight. The young man couldn't help but feel a little indignant. One had to know that the swordsman with a wooden sword whom he admired didn't seem to have won a single fight in Great Peace City. The first ancestor of Longhu Mountain was drawing talismans smoothly. Even if this immortal deliberately slowed down to increase the thickness of the talisman, the young king still showed no signs of stopping him. The closer it was to the end of the fight, the more the odds of victory favored Longhu Mountain. The old Taoist with the lotus crown looked more and more solemn, and he even couldn't suppress his fear. Not to mention the old Taoist who had achieved the status of an immortal after several generations of good deeds. Even before he ascended, he had been guarding the old Liang dynasty for 30 years as the immortal protector. He had never experienced such a strange feeling. The Taoists cultivated tranquility. The secular world thought that the so-called tranquility of the heart was like a pool of stagnant water. In fact, that was not the case. When the heart rippled, the state of mind would still have tranquility amidst the movement. That was true tranquility. This was somewhat similar to the movement of the Buddhist heart banner, but it was also different. An immortal's Tao heart was stable without impurities. If an immortal's body was stained with impurities, it might not cause the Tao heart to shake. However, if there were cracks in the latter, it would definitely affect the true impurities. Therefore, the lotus-crowned old Taoist knew that he had to follow his heart. Immortals followed their hearts and followed the will of heaven. The old Taoist was no longer rigid like the fish swimming under the bridge that the Taoist Saint Lao Zhuang had mentioned. As an immortal in heaven who had already jumped over the dragon gate, he wanted to jump out of the water to take a look and take the initiative to merge with the heavenly Tao. Then, the old immortal tapped the ground with the tip of his foot and leaped into the air. As the lotus-crowned old Taoist rose into the air, a young lord rose with him. The cold knife in his hand was still in the boring horizontal knife style. When his body was almost at the same level as the beam of the Tongtian platform, the old Taoist waved his sleeve and stretched out his jade-white palm. His palm faced up and then suddenly pressed down. He laughed loudly and said, "Where the Dharma seal shines, it shines brightly. All evils retreat." Not only did the young lord in front of the old Taoist disappear, but hundreds of young lords in the square also disappeared in an instant. They were like ghosts in the night who suddenly encountered the sun in the sky. The old Taoist looked around and did not see any Su Fengnian. The lotus-crowned immortal shouted softly and raised his hands up. The Taoist is 1 foot tall and the devil is 10 feet tall. Su Fengnian came to the top of the immortal's head. He held the knife in his left hand and chopped down. At this moment, the old Taoist sneered, "How can such a small trick deceive the heaven's heart?" The old Taoist's hands did not move, but at the same time, the old Taoist also transformed into 4 immortals in front, back, left, and right. 4 Dharma forms, each formed a lotus golden body. He stretched out his palm and a lotus bloomed in his palm. His 2 fingers were together like a sword and pointed to the sky. His 5 fingers opened and then clenched, and a light beam went straight to the sky. It was like holding a long spear that penetrated the heaven and earth. But the 5th Su Fengnian flashed and disappeared in an instant. The old Taoist who seemed to have 3 heads and 6 arms frowned and looked around blankly. His eyes were like torches, shining with purple gold. Finally here. The founder of the first generation who drew the talisman on the Yulei sword sneered. His finger on the tip of the sword gently knocked, his body slightly leaned forward, and gently breathed on the tip of the sword. Seal. It was a simple word, but it was like a big bell that rang in the sky of the imperial astronomer. Words were the law of heaven. One word could decide one's life and death. The talisman sword did not move, but a 3-foot golden light swept out from the sword. The golden light swirled and lingered around the immortal holding the sword. Wherever the golden light went, talismans appeared out of thin air, like the spring couplets that a devout child pasted on the door. The earth cracked, the rain stopped, the grass and trees turned to ashes, the birds fell to the ground, and the dragons and tigers were subdued. Between the immortal holding the sword on the ground and the Taoist with the lotus crown in the sky, talismans hung. From the latter to the former, intermittent pages of talismans exploded one after another. Golden light sputtered, and occasionally drops fell to the ground. The square that was as hard as iron suddenly shot out stones. The Taoist with the lotus crown who turned to look down suddenly narrowed his eyes and laughed, "Evil creature, still not showing yourself." At the same time, the immortal holding the sword casually flicked the tip of the sword in the air, and turned to the heavenly platform and shouted, "What are you waiting for?" The Confucian scholar Xia Guining, who had been watching the fire from the other side of the river, was originally paying attention to the movements in the palace hall. It seemed that he did not see the result he wanted, but it was also within his expectations. There was a faint coldness on his face. After hearing the two immortals' calls, he no longer hesitated and suddenly shook his shoulders and raised his sleeves. The world's cool breeze, wrapped in 2 sleeves. The great rivers and mountains, carried on one shoulder. 8 seals, rise. In the sky of the imperial astronomer, 8 different-sized imperial jade seals suddenly appeared. The first ancestor of Mount Longhu grabbed the hilt of the Yulei sword with both hands and pulled it back. The Taoist with the lotus crown raised his hands as if he was lifting something heavy, and lifted it up toward his left shoulder. A long golden rope as thick as a spear shaft appeared in the hands of the 2 immortals. The immortals sat in the clouds, fishing for the fate of the mortal world. If the fishing line that was tens of thousands of feet long was twisted into a rope, it would be the golden rope in the hands of the 2 immortals. This rope went straight through one of Su Fengnian's shoulders. It nailed the young lord in the air, unable to move at all. Blood soaked the long rope. Chapter 1641. Su Fengnian closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He finally breathed. It was as though he wanted to use this breath to vent all the anger in his chest and absorb the fortune of the world. But according to reason, this was not the time to breathe. Xia Guaning's lips curled. He raised his arm and lightly waved a finger. Do not look at indecent things. The Confucians have set the rules for the world for almost 800 years. You, Su Fengnian, cannot lower your head to the heavenly Tao, but since you still live in the world, how can you not bow to the heavens and earth? As this scholar's finger pointed, 2 jade seals exploded towards Su Fengnian's eyes. Xia Guaning moved his finger again and continued to say casually, "Do not listen to indecent things." The 2 jade seals flew towards Su Fengnian's ears. When Xia Guining said the words, "Do not speak indecent things," it was as though the 5th jade seal had heard it and moved. The beam under Xia Guining's feet that led out of the pavilion of heaven-reaching pavilion was unable to bear the weight and started to crack. Life and death were hanging by a thread. Su Fengnian jerked the corner of his mouth. When the time comes, the heavens and earth will work together. The heavens and earth have reason and then etiquette. You, Xia Guining, think that you hold the rules of etiquette, but that may not be the reason of the heavens and earth. At the very least, that Duke Yenqing who sent me an item before leaving, he does not feel that you, Xia Guining, are in the right. A pendant fell from Su Fengnian's waist. It was a square object. Just as the 5 jade seals were a hair's breadth away from each other, Su Fengnian had a thought. Do not move if you are wrong. Not only did the 4 jade seals vibrate violently, the other 4 jade seals that Xie Guining had not moved also vibrated. Back then, when His Royal Highness had returned from his second journey, the old man had pointed at a piece of meat cut from the vassal king and said to his son that in the future, it would be up to the young to reason with others. This time, he had forced his way into the imperial astronomer of Great Peace City. No matter how vicious his methods were, the expression of the young vassal king could be said to be warm and calm. At least, he was not angry or vicious. Su Fengnian, who was hung in the air by the long golden rope, began to walk with his saber. He walked toward the Tongtian platform, toward Xie Guining, who had schemed against him, Su Fengnian, and Beiliang. The long rope was pulled in a semicircle. The tip of Mount Longhu's founder's Yulei's sword and the hands of the Lotus Crown Immortal both appeared to be struck by lightning. The two immortals stamped their feet almost at the same time, trying their best to stop the long rope's swift and violent momentum. Xie Guining's face was filled with shock. His gaze flashed across 2 places. One was on the roof of the Imperial Palace, the other was outside the city to the south of Great Peace City, and the other was in the capital area further south. He was both shocked and furious. Zhao Zhuan, Tantai Pingjing, Duke Yanqing, you dare to work together to ruin my great cause. Su Fengnian, whose shoulder was still pinned by the long rope, swung his saber. Xie Guining, who was standing on the beam of the Tongtian platform, grabbed the 4 jade seals and arranged them in a line to protect him and Su Fengnian's saber. He himself flashed away, allowing the 4 jade seals to fall to the ground, and the beam under his feet to break in 2. Under the saber, the entire towering Tongtian pavilion was cut in 2. Thousands of feet up in the sky, the saber seemed to have crashed into something with a bang. The 2 immortals looked at each other. After their gazes met, they released their hands almost at the same time. After Su Fengnian's saber, he turned and sneered. Want to leave? The Daoist with a lotus crown who had a red thread crawling on his sleeve sighed. He pulled all the long ropes with one hand and pulled back the red thread that was about to continue spreading, allowing the 2 red threads to freely dance around his sleeve. The old Daoist nodded slightly to the young Daoist who had abandoned the talisman sword. The latter had a complicated expression on his face. The 2 scarlet red threads were actually mixed with Han Qingshuan's death aura and Qi Jiajie's sword aura. Both of them came from Liang Imperial Court and died for the Zhao family. Using the fate of the Zhao family in Liang to attack the fate of the Zhao family in Mount Longhu was self-contradictory and wonderful. Presumably, this was the trump card used by the young king to destroy the immortal's purity. The next moment, the Taoist with the lotus crown, who knew that he could not escape, stood a few steps away from the ancestor of Mount Longhu and gently bowed to bid farewell. It was better for one person to die in reincarnation than both of them to die in the human world. A mirror appeared behind the old Taoist. It was the treasure of the Guanyin sect in the South Sea, the water-moon sky well that suppressed countless people with great fate in the world. The old Taoist was forcibly dragged into the well and whispered, "As long as the heavenly Tao does not collapse, the incense will not be extinguished. Respectfully send the ancestor back to the heavenly gate." Looking at the young Taoist who seemed to be the descendant of the old Taoist, he ignored the Taoist with the lotus crown who was ready to die. He only raised his hands and asked himself, "Where is the first?" The few remaining immortals of Mount Longhu on the square of the Imperial Astronomer all showed a sorrowful expression. While the immortals were heartbroken, they also felt an indescribable sense of awe. This time, it could be said that no one had ever come to the human world together. How could they be reduced to such a miserable state? On the other hand, the 2 younger immortals of Mount Longhu, Xiao Shi and Xiao Danxia, who had less experience than the ancestors of the past, looked relieved. They looked at each other and smiled. Although there was bitterness, there was no fear. A voice came from above the head of the ancestor, containing a strong sense of sarcasm. "At your grandmother's house." The young immortal suddenly raised his head, finally unable to hide his anger. He was so angry that he laughed and said, "Do you really think that I don't dare to risk my life and perish together with you, Su Fengnian?" Su Fengnian stood in the air, too lazy to talk nonsense with this immortal. Just as he was about to attack, his shoulders suddenly tilted, as if someone had patted him. A series of words softly sounded in his ears. "Kid, not bad. You've already broken that old bastard Xia Guaning's broken bowl. You don't have to care about what happens next. Don't thank me, Dong Tai. This sword of mine was comprehended by me, Ma Wei, yesterday. This sword is called Will Spirit." Chapter 1642. If you think the name isn't good enough, you can give me a more imposing one later. Just like the name of Jian Zhouhuang's last move, it's not bad. If there's a chance, we'll meet again on the battlefield outside Beiliang. Su Fengnian was taken aback. Because of Dong Tai's last words. "I, Dong Tai, have left, but someone else has come. That sword." In the distance, there was no trace of the peach blossom sword god on the high wall beside Chao Chongqing and Luo Yang. The white-clothed woman said indifferently, "Suing, you stay. I'm leaving. If I can avoid meeting him, I won't." Without waiting for the red-robed woman to urge her to stay, Luo Yang turned and left alone. Further away, Chai Qingshan's two disciples opened their eyes wide when Dong Tai attacked, but the girl closed her eyes. The young man and girl probably didn't know that the difference in their swordsmanship was like heaven and earth. The Jianghu bigwigs near Chai Qingshan were all shaken by Su Fengnian's blade and Dong Tai's sword and fell to the ground, battered and exhausted. When they finally managed to sit up, they were thrown off their feet again. A sword from south to north came again. But as the sword moved, the sword came again. The founding ancestor of Longhu Mountain's expression flickered. In the end, he swallowed his anger and no longer looked at Su Fengnian. He shouted to the 9 heavens, "Open the heavenly gates." Su Fengnian gripped his blade with both hands and looked at the sky. "If you dare open the heavenly gates, then I'll cut them down as well." And then the sword came. Not only did it easily pierce through the head of the founding ancestor of Longhu Mountain, but all the other immortals in the Imperial Observatory Plaza, except for Zhao Shi and Zhao Danxia, were also beheaded. Su Fengnian had already killed immortals quickly and ruthlessly. This person seemed to be even more outstanding than the others. The young man wearing an ordinary Wudang Taoist robe arrived leisurely behind the flying sword. Without waiting for the father and son, 2 Taoist masters, to come back to their senses, he was grabbed and tossed into the sky like a chicken. Before parting, he said, "Be a good immortal, the affairs of the world will be handled by the people of the mortal world." This is where Qi Xuanzhen's fate with Dragon Tiger Mountain ends. Then, this elusive young Daoist stood in front of Su Fengnian with a smile, blocking the path of the saber. Su Fengnian flew into a rage and shouted angrily, "You with the surname Hong." The young Taoist shrank his neck and squeezed out a smile. "His Royal Highness, you have enough burdens on your shoulders. Don't take on this burden. There's little Taoist, Wu Dang, and the hierarch Li Yufu. It's enough." Su Fengnian glared at him. The young Taoist swallowed his saliva and said softly, "I can't let your sister worry, right?" Su Fengnian muttered, "You're itching for a beating again, aren't you?" And subconsciously kicked him out of habit. The young Taoist jumped a few steps to the side. He was also used to his own cowardice. If it was many years ago, His Highness the Crown Prince would feel that his kick was very impressive. And the young Taoists on the mountain who were watching the fight between the young martial granduncle and the hedonistic Crown Prince would feel that their martial granduncle was really powerful. Every time he dodged those kicks every year, he would have the demeanor of an immortal. Now, His Royal Highness had become the King of Beiliang, one of the 4 Grandmasters of Martial Arts Evaluation. That timid but kind young martial granduncle had also become the immortal Taoist who rode a crane to Jiangnan. He had become Qi Xuanzhen and Lu Zhu. But when they met again, he was still him, and they were still them. Su Fengnian's eyes secretly reddened. He said in a hoarse voice, "You should have left the mountain earlier. One day earlier would have been better. My sister would have been happy for one more day." The young Taoist pursed his lips, wrinkled his face, and shed tears. He couldn't say anything. Su Fengnian suddenly put an arm around the young Taoist's shoulder and whispered, "With Li Yufu's help, you can still see my sister, right?" The young Taoist nodded vigorously. Su Fengnian snorted coldly, "In the future, no matter which life you are in, when you see my sister again, you must treat her well. Otherwise, I can still beat you." "Lu Zhu, so what? I'm still that so-and-so and so-and-so. I have a much better background than you." A somewhat promising younger brother was afraid that his sister would be bullied when she got married and left home. They should all pretend to be evil when talking to their brother-in-law, right? The young Taoist master touched the pot that didn't boil. He wondered, "Didn't you cut off the karma with them?" Su Fengnian, who had put the cold blade at his waist, punched the other under the armpit. The latter inhaled sharply. It was unknown if it was because of the pain or because he was pretending to be obedient like in the past. He smiled foolishly with tears on his face. Su Fengnian hesitated. "You are leaving. You are really not going to be the person who defeats everything." The young Taoist master shook his head and said with a smile, "I am most afraid of carrying a burden. I cannot do this kind of thing. Also, in the past, I could never beat you on the mountain. Even if I could, I was used to being bullied in the past. I am still afraid." The two stood next to each other and looked at the bustling Great Peace City below them. Su Fengnian said in a voice that only he could hear, "Every time I miss eldest sister, I like to think of her sitting on the back of the crane with you. At that time, she must be very happy and smiling. When I think of it this way, I am not sad." The young Taoist master did not speak. His figure was ethereal as though he would disappear with the wind in the next moment. Su Fengnian's voice became even lower. "To have you. I am actually very proud, brother-in-law." A wave of suppressed and bitter laughter came from beside him. "Ah! Brother-in-law." Su Fengnian flew into a rage out of humiliation and kicked him. The young Taoist master Hong Shixiang was no longer there. Su Fengnian was dazed. After a long time, he lightly landed on the square of the imperial astronomer and walked towards the crop altar. As he walked up the stairs, he bent down and grabbed a handful of soil. Su Fengnian stood at the top. He crouched down, reached out, tilted his palm and allowed the soil to slide down. The young person dressed in mourning and covered in blood closed his eyes and said to himself, "Father, mother, eldest sister. I am very well, do not worry." Chapter 1643. On this day in late autumn in the second year of Xiangfu, it was destined to evolve into countless strange legends. At the imperial astronomer, the sun and moon rose, the sound of Buddha rose in spirals, and many rainbows hung in the sky. The scene in the Jingji Southern Army's camp was also terrifying. The two immortals were like gods on earth, fighting against 10,000 people. Their figures were as fast as dragons entering the sea. In the process of the two sides fighting, the entire camp was torn into pieces. Everywhere they passed, they were unstoppable. In particular, the troops under the direct command of the new Minister of War, General Wu Zhongshuan, suffered the most. What normal people called not acclimatized to the climate was just physical discomfort. It was rare to see elite subordinates like Wu Shangshu lose their arms, legs, and even their lives. Most importantly, almost no one recognized the true identity of the two figures. This made the Jingji Southern Army feel even more vexed. When the culprit, Su Fengnian, walked down from the crop altar, the armored soldiers of the Li family, under the leadership of Li Shougua and Li Zhongliang, vowed to guard the gate with their lives. They looked like they would step over the corpses of more than 1,000 people if they wanted to leave. In reality, more than half of the heavy cavalry outside the gate had quietly retreated out of the streets after Anong General Ma Zhongxian had frantically sent out a secret order. However, in order to not disturb the people in the inner and outer cities and not cause more panic, this cavalry that had been greatly weakened before entering the battlefield did not immediately head out of the city to their camp. Ma Zhongxian had hurriedly left his father's sick bed in the manner of General Zhenbei. He didn't even have time to put on the robes of a military official, much less put on the armor. This Anong general turned his head and looked at the remnants of the army shrouded in a tragic atmosphere. His heart bled. In particular, Ma Zhongxian, who was familiar with the officialdom of the capital, knew that once the news of his family's death spread out of the manor to the court and the marketplace, everyone in Taiyan City would quickly say that his father had died at the exact moment the king of Beiliang was making a ruckus at the Ministry of Rites and the imperial astronomer. He had taken his last breath because he had been scared to death by that young man surnamed Su. Ma Zhongxian clenched his fists tightly. His eyes were bloodshot. He wished he could turn his horse around and give the order to chop that Su guy into mincemeat. A plain-clothed old man walked through the Li family's fragile infantry formation. Li Shouguo wanted to remind him, but the old man waved his hand with a smile and walked straight to the king of Beiliang who had stopped at the edge of the crop altar. The old man did not stand in front of the young man. The two of them walked side by side, but one of them faced north and the other faced south. Su Fengnian said indifferently, "I originally thought that it would be Tantanon from the Minxia province who came here to persuade us. I didn't expect that it would be the head of the secretariat who came here to play the villain." The head of the secretariat, Qi Yanglong, looked up at the altar and chuckled. "It's a pity that the imperial astronomer was destroyed just like that." Su Fengnian said, "Beiliang lost more than 100,000 men outside the Great Wall, and everyone died facing the north. Isn't that a pity?" Qi Yanglong nodded and said in a low voice, "In my opinion, it's all a pity. As a scholar who likes to read history, I feel that it's a pity that the imperial astronomer was destroyed. As a citizen of Liang, I feel that it's a pity that more than 100,000 Beiliang soldiers died in battle. However, I came to the capital to ask for a robe from the imperial court to wear, so I have no choice but to come here and nag at the king." Su Fengnian's blade-wielding left hand was pierced through by the long rope. His arm drooped down, and fresh blood flowed out of his sleeve and dripped down along his fingers to the ground. His face turned pale and bloodless because of the violent qi in his body. In an instant, it turned into a dazzling purple-gold color. As for the crack between his eyebrows, fresh blood flowed down the bridge of his nose. It added a strong sense of viciousness to the handsome face of this young vassal king. This young man who had shaken the entire capital twice by himself said expressionlessly, 3,000 men. For each death, 1,000 taels of Beiliang's grain will be deducted. This is what Zhao Zhuan said himself. Then I might as well tell the head of the secretariat directly that if one of the 3 million taels of grain is missing, there will be 30,000 Beiliang cavalry going south into Guangling. Anyway, it's a matter of course for the vassal king to be in trouble. If the imperial court doesn't care about the lives of the people of Beiliang, Su Fengnian, am very easy to talk to. I don't mind letting you know what loyalty is." When Qi Yanglong heard these words, he didn't pretend to be angry. Instead, he smiled and said, "King of Beiliang, to be honest, no matter where my ancestral home is, I, Qi Yanglong, have always regarded the Shangyin Academy of Guangling Path as my home. Yang Xinqing and Yan Zhenchuan have already messed around on my land once. That bastard Song Li and Ko Jianghuai have done it again. Next, it will be Wu Zhongshuan and Lu Xingxiang's turn to mess around. It's fine if they can end the battle quickly. No matter who wins or loses, as long as there is a winner, it will be a good thing for the people of Guangling Path. What I'm afraid of is a stalemate. It's fine if all the young men and old soldiers die, but if all the soldiers die, won't it be the same as using the lives of the people to fill the hole? Isn't that right, king of Beiliang. Su Fengnian didn't say anything. Qi Yanglong did not look like an important official in the central government, but more like an old man who had a bellyful of complaints. Now that he finally found a young man he could confide in, he could not shut up. Qiao Chongqing has a knot in his heart and can't get over his own threshold. Even Duke Yenchun can't persuade him, so of course I'm not willing to waste my breath. As for those who helped the imperial court to lead troops to war, I, as the head of the secretariat, can't persuade them. Moreover, the martial artists in the world make contributions on the battlefield. Whether they die on the battlefield or be conferred the title of marquis or become a general, it all depends on their own abilities. It's all up to their own destinies. It's all their reasons. I, Qi Yanglong, can't go and nag them just because I say I pity the common people in the world and say empty words like asking them to lay down their butcher's knife. At the very least, if I can persuade Lu Xing and Wu Zhongshuan, there will definitely be Ma Xing and Song Zhongshuan. After all, I can't stop the trend of the world. Qi Yanglong suddenly turned his head and stared closely at the young man whose face was covered in blood. But I think it's useful to tell you. I can't help it. You're Su Zhao's son. Su Zhao has always been very reasonable. Otherwise, why would he use gold and silver to build a 10-li-long embankment for my family in order to let that little girl Wei Xiong enter the academy? Before I came to the capital, I had to go there every morning and night regardless of rain or shine. I don't know if Su Zhao has told you before, but when he led troops to Jianghu, he passed by Shangyin Academy from Mount Longhu and made a secret visit. He blocked me in my room and took off that cold saber. Well, if I'm not wrong, it's probably the one you're hanging now. He slapped it heavily on my desk and asked me if the name Su Fengnian was good. Of course, I gave him a thumbs up and said it was good. It was really good. Then your father immediately became amiable and said that I, Qi Yanglong, was indeed a learned scholar. He even turned his head and asked your mother to say that I was full of military strategies. I was very happy. Of course, it wasn't because of this low-level flattery, but because in the end, your father didn't cut me with a saber. Su Fengnian raised his right hand and wiped his face. Chapter 1644. Qi Yanglong continued to look at the profound crop altar. You definitely can't imagine how much money Beiliang sent over to build the embankment. No matter how long the embankment is, how much money would it take to build the Shangyin Academy with all the manpower and material resources? However, how much money did your father secretly send over? Do you know? It was a total of 3 million taels of silver. Therefore, not only did the Shangyin Academy gain a lake embankment with willow trees, but in the next 5 years, they also secretly built a library that was the best in Jiangnan. There were no less than 200 sets of printed books in the library. In addition to the mountain of silver, there was also a light secret letter that was handed to me. The words on it were the ugliest I've ever seen. However, for more than 10 years, when I had nothing else to do, I would often take it out and read it. The letter said that his eldest son would definitely be good at studying and would come to Shangyin Academy to study in the future. Perhaps in the future, the Su family would become the top scholar. That would truly bring honor to the family. If the son of a vassal king couldn't become an official, then being the top scholar wouldn't be bad either. When I first read the secret letter, I really wanted to write back and ask him, "You're a warrior who killed countless scholars. Do you have nothing better to do than let your son become a scholar? Your Su family is the most powerful official in your generation. You have both the pillar of the state and the hereditary throne in your hands. Do you really lack the title of top scholar?" I also wanted to ask him, what is 3 million taels of silver? So many people of the 8 states have died, and how many scholars have died? Can this little bit of silver compensate for the destruction of the mountains and rivers and the sinking of the central plains? You're a dignified butcher. Why don't you want your son to become a vassal king? Later, when I read the letter again, As time passed, the paper became more and more wrinkled, but my heart became calmer and calmer. During this period, I heard that after the death of the old emperor, you actually dared to sing and dance in Mount Qingliang to celebrate peace. Fireworks could be seen all over the city, and music could be heard all over the mountain. Later, you were thrown out of the gate of the prince's mansion. That was why you had 3 years of traveling. At that time, I knew that Beiliang wouldn't be content with its lot. I once hoped that you could squeeze out Qin Jibao and succeed in becoming the king of Beiliang. However, you were willing to be a peaceful vassal king and let a general of Liang enter Beiliang. Beiliang would be Liang's Beiliang, and the people of Beiliang would be Liang's people. Half of the country's taxes would go to the Tu Liao, and the other half of the country's transportation to be transported to Beiliang, the country, B. When Su Fingnian heard this, the corners of his mouth twitched. The old man laughed self-deprecatingly. Of course, this is the wishful thinking of a pedantic scholar. Soldiers. To answer. The old man waited quietly. Su Fingnian answered, 10 against 10, 50-50. 100 against 100. My Beiliang will win for sure. 1,000 against 1,000. You'll lose miserably. 10,000 against 10,000. There's no need to fight, is there? The old man smiled. Really? Su Fingnian chuckled. I'm just more educated than Su Xiao. My temper is good. The old man nodded. Yes, yes. That's why you went to the Ministry of Rites to teach the 2 assistant ministers a lesson. Then you came here alone. You didn't even give face to the Empress Dowager and started a massacre inside and outside the Imperial Astronomer. You even slaughtered a large group of immortals in heaven. Your Highness' temper is really good. Su Fingnian said unhappily, we just became friends, and now you're trying to take advantage of your seniority. Do you really think I don't have any strength left to return to Shimaway? The old man roared with laughter. All right, I've used Su Xiao to get close to you, Your Highness. If I say any more, I won't be able to keep my old face. You, Su Fingnian, can fight, and the Beiliang cavalry can fight even better. I won't hide anything and tell you everything. No matter if it's the threat of losing 1,000 sure per person or the generosity of 3 million sure of transport, it's all the young emperor's impulsiveness. As the head of the Secretariat, I don't dare to take it seriously, and I hope Your Highness doesn't take it seriously. But I dare to guarantee that from the end of this autumn to the end of next summer, Liyang, especially Great Peace City, will send 1 million sure of transport to Beiliang even if they have to tighten their belts. If possible, they will send another 500,000 sure. After this, there are only 4 words, do your best. Su Fingnian frowned. The old man said emotionally, stop while you're ahead. Both sides have a way out. In the court, from the small officials, to the high officials, to those wearing official robes, and even the dragon robes, there has never been a happy person. Without waiting for Su Fingnian to speak, the old man sighed and said, I don't know if I'm mistaken, but even though there are more and more young faces in the court, when I'm among them, I feel a sense of lethargy. Maybe after the white-robed monk Li Xiaoxin's almanac was rejected, Zhang Julu also feels the same sadness as me. The old man turned his head and stared at the heavily injured young man. In Bai Yan, Er's book of poems that may never be circulated, he said that there are 2 great joys and 1 great hatred in life. In the Jianghu, having chivalry in a dangerous place is one of the joys. On the battlefield, picking up a blade in the face of death is one of the great joys. Every time I read in a book that the historians like to skim over, piles of bones, the people are in a terrible situation, it is a great hatred. The old man said with a smile, pitifully, this blue-eyed man died early. On the map of Liang dynasty, which he had glanced at many times, there was a place where the names of hundreds of thousands of dead people were engraved on a stone tablet. In the history books that generations of scholars read, there are no longer only the names of winners and losers. Earlier, there was a fellow who said that he had seen you and showed off in front of me. In fact, if it weren't for the fact that I couldn't disobey the Emperor's orders, I wouldn't have come here to be bullied. What's so good about you, Su Fengnian? I'm an old man, not one of those young ladies who admire young heroes. Hey, when I was young, I might have been even more handsome than you. Su Fengnian said, then it's settled. The old man asked, then when will your highness leave the capital? Su Fengnian walked forward. The day after tomorrow. The old man looked at this figure and asked with a smile, if you can't today, how about tomorrow? There's nothing to see in Great Peace City. Su Fengnian stopped walking, turned around and said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, tomorrow. Fine, Lord Head of the Secretariat wants to see the stone tablet? Then this king will personally take you there. The old man's smile froze. The day after tomorrow it is. Early in the morning, I will personally go to the Demoyai post station and knock on the door. Su Fengnian ignored this shameless old man and walked to the gates of the Imperial Astronomer. The old man behind him raised his hands and waved them to the sides. The armored soldiers of the Leaf family quickly scattered to the left and right, leaving a wide path. Suddenly, the old man quickly caught up to Su Fengnian and grabbed Su Fengnian's right hand, unwilling to let go. Su Fengnian turned to look at this old man whose expression had suddenly turned solemn. The old man lowered his voice and said, Su Fengnian, you have to make sure that fewer people die in this world. Su Fengnian wanted to turn and leave. The old man seemed to have the strength from somewhere and gripped Su Fengnian's hand tightly, his face red. Su Fengnian could have just waved his sleeve and broken free, but for some reason, Su Fengnian sighed softly and nodded. He said helplessly, do I need to say it? The old man finally released his hand. After walking a few steps, Su Fengnian heard the old man say in a small voice, if I don't do this, I can't show that I, Qi Yanglong, am a savior. Su Fengnian's lips twitched. He raised his right arm, extended his thumb, and then pointed down. He looked at the back of the young man. The old man said again, well, he has some of my style when I was young. Perhaps he felt that he was too far away and the young king couldn't hear his mutterings, so when the king of Bailiang suddenly turned his head, the old man turned his back with lightning speed. He put his hands behind his back and walked quickly to the crop altar, as if he was in a hurry to go there to enjoy the scenery. The old man and the young man walked with their backs facing each other. The old man restrained the expression on his face and said in his heart, green eyes, if you were still alive, would you grit your teeth and not open the ban on the transport of grain, or would you go against all opinions and open the transport of grain? No matter what, I'm not as good as you. The old man stood at the top of the crop altar and looked at the dazzling loose soil. He slowly squatted down. Su Shao, Zhang Julu. You two fought for half your lives when you were alive. After you died and went underground, you would actually drink together, right? At the gate of the Imperial Astronomer, there was a girl who was holding a scallion pancake in one hand and rubbing her mink hat with the other. Su Fengnian walked over and bent down to help her adjust her mink hat. Then, a bright red robe fluttered over like a butterfly. She arrived in front of Su Fengnian and spun in an ethereal manner. Su Fengnian waited for her to stop and nodded with a soft smile, you still look good. Su Fengnian held the two people's hands and said, let's go back to the post house first. We'll go home together the day after tomorrow. Su Yanbing had returned to the carriage at the gate of the Imperial Astronomer. He had already put away the spear. Su Fengnian wiped the blood that just oozed out from the corner of his mouth with the back of his hand and said with a smile, you're back so soon. This spear is really fast. Su Yanbing, who was confused for a moment, nodded. When the young lord sat in the carriage, and the carriage drove for a long distance, Su Yanbing, who finally realized what was going on, laughed and scolded, Mother****, you don't even use a dirty word when cursing people. After laughing, Su Yanbing looked into the distance and was a little lost in thought. The girl wearing the mink hat and the woman wearing the red robe didn't sit in the carriage for some reason. Inside the carriage, the young man who was covered in blood took off his cold sword, held the king's robe with both hands, and buried his head in it. His shoulders trembled. No expression. No crying. Chapter 1645. A middle-aged man with a refined appearance appeared outside the Demoyai post house. The post house officer looked at this man who gave him a strange feeling. He heard that he called himself Wuxia and said that he could enter as long as he reported his arrival to the king of Baliang. The post house officer saw his outstanding bearing and did not dare to slight him. However, when the post house officer did not see the prince, he was stopped by the man surnamed Su, who was acting as a coachman. The two of them walked back to the post house together. Su Yanbing and Wuxia stood separately outside the post house officer's door. The latter smiled and said, "Long time no see." Su Yanbing had no intention of letting him pass. His eyes were cold as he said, "Since you did not show your face in Beimang, isn't it too late for you to come now? What, do you think that being a general in Western Shu is not satisfying enough?" Wuxia laughed loudly and said, "Lu Yanbing. Oh, that's not right. I heard that you bestowed the surname Su to my brother-in-law, so I should call you Su Yanbing now. Regardless of whether I am in Northern Mang or Western Shu, when an uncle comes to visit his nephew, you're going to stop him." Su Yanbing laughed coldly and said, "If you want to die, I won't stop you." Wuxia sniffled and said, "What a temper. No wonder you are a martial arts grandmaster who is on par with the king of Shu. You don't have to beat me to death. I'm scared to death." Suddenly, the man who called himself the king of Baliang's uncle shouted, "Nephew!" There was a loud bang. Wuxia slid back dozens of feet from the Demoyai post house officer's door. Su Yanbing slowly retracted his foot. He even rubbed the soles of his feet on the door sill as if he was afraid of dirtying his boots. Wuxia, who had leaned back but didn't fall to the ground, stood up straight and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He didn't get angry and continued to walk to the door. At this time, Su Fengnian, who had changed into clean clothes, was already at the door. Su Yanbing moved aside. Wuxia put away his frivolous expression and no longer had any thoughts of barging into the post house. He stood outside the door and said, "I, Wuxia, have never thought of 4 things in my life. My sister married Su Shao, Su Shao did not rebel against Liang, and you protected Baliang and left the imperial astronomer alive." Su Fengnian's expression was complicated. "Why don't you come in and have a cup of tea?" Wuxia shook his head and said, "No. Regardless of whether I'm right or wrong, I don't regret my actions. Since I didn't show myself to meet my nephew in Northern Mang back then, I don't have the right to enter today." Su Fengnian asked, "So you have something to say?" Wuxia still shook his head. "I just came to tell you that your trip to Beimang was not in vain. Li Shan has already begun to make some moves. But let me remind you that even so, don't expect them to help you in your hour of need. It's best if you don't even think about adding flowers to the brocade. Beimang's peace order might be alerted to this. Be careful of the aureole behind you." Su Fengnian nodded. "I know." Wuxia grinned. "If there really comes a day when we fight on the battlefield, Chen Jibao will not show mercy. I will do the same. I hope you can do the same." Su Fengnian said, "No problem." Wuxia was just about to speak when he heard his nephew, considerately, remind him, "If you want to vomit blood, vomit it for a while." Wuqi's face immediately darkened. He coldly harumphed, clutching his chest as he turned around and left. Su Yanbing glanced at his departing figure. He held back his laughter and said softly, "That kick of mine was not heavy." Su Fengnian grunted. "That's why I said that." Su Yanbing was speechless. That sentence seemed to have been much heavier than his kick. Su Yanbing suddenly turned his head. Su Fengnian helplessly said, "Forget it." The red-robed woman and a certain young girl not far away, who had been itching to give it a try, finally gave up. Su Yanbing laughed. "Then I'll go find some wine to drink. The post house doesn't even have a bottle of green ant wine. That's too unreasonable." After saying this, Su Yanbing walked towards a restaurant on the street. Unlike yesterday's Demoyai post house, where the majority of the guests were men, the seats of today's restaurants, inns, and tea houses were all filled with women. There were young women, plump women, and even many young girls who were in the prime of their lives. When Su Fengnian appeared at the entrance to see Wuxia, almost at the same time, flower hairpin women poked their heads out of the windows, their eyes shining brightly. There were those who were full of affection, those who were bold enough to cast amorous glances at him, and those who were shy and wanted to say something. There were also bold and unrestrained women who were shamelessly shouting the name of the king of Bailiang. Su Yanbing had not even entered the restaurant when countless handkerchiefs, round fans, scented sachets floated above his head, a large shower of fragrant incense. These women were all saying things like, "I'll have to trouble this Bailiang warrior to give this fan to His Highness." There were even more women who ran out of their rooms. They did not dare to approach Su Yanbing. In any case, they threw the letters in their hands at him and turned to flee. Even the half-step Marshal Saint Su Yanbing could not withstand this terrifying array. On both sides of the street, soft whispers could be heard from upstairs and downstairs. See, I told you a long time ago that my young master Su is the most handsome man in the world, but you didn't believe me. Now you've gone crazy. My eyes are about to get pregnant. If His Highness can walk out of the post house and get a little closer to hear him say a few words, even if I die, it will be worth it. All the handsome young masters of our great peace city added together can't compare to my big brother Su. I can't, he's really too handsome. Just looking at him from afar makes me drunk. It's a pity that I couldn't sneak out yesterday. Otherwise, I would have been able to see His Highness's heroic figure. Lend me your shoulder, I want to cry for a while, I've decided. In this life, I will only marry young Master Su. If that doesn't work, I'll just be a maidservant. Su Yanbing patted a scented sachet off his shoulder and decisively turned to walk back to the post house. He wondered if he should have His Highness leave Great Peace City as soon as possible. Weren't the women of the capital a little too formidable? Su Fengnian had already brought Jia and Suing back to the courtyard. He was dressed in purple and had come uninvited to lie down on a rattan chair under the eaves, resting with his eyes closed. Su Fengnian had also brought over a rattan chair. The woman in red who had taken off her veil crouched down next to Su Fengnian. The chuckling girl sat on the steps and had pulled out a scallion pancake from somewhere and was nibbling on it. Su Fengnian lay down on the chair and softly asked, "Why haven't you returned to Mount Wei yet?" Xianyuan Qingfeng did not speak. Su Fengnian opened his eyes and looked at the eaves. That year when he had entered the capital, it had also been at the post house in Great Peace City, on a rattan chair in this courtyard. Su Fengnian had talked to this crazy woman about snowmen and ideals. It was also at that time that the idiot with the wooden sword had left the Jianghu. Xianyuan Qingfeng did not open his eyes. He coldly asked, "After all these years, have you pitied me or yourself?" Su Fengnian smiled. "Both." Xianyuan Qingfeng fell silent. Su Fengnian said, "Thank you for helping me suppress Qi Jiajia's sword aura yesterday." Xianyuan Qingfeng coldly said, "You owe me the title of number 1 in the world." Su Fengnian snickered. I know. As long as it's business, I guarantee that I'll be honest with everyone." Xianyuan Qingfeng started working and muttered to himself, "Business, huh?" In the next moment, there was only a light breeze under the eaves. Su Fengnian turned his head and looked at the rattan chair without purple clothes. He stood up and sat next to the chuckling girl. She took out another scallion pancake and placed it in front of Su Fingnian without turning her head. Su Fingnian took the slightly hard pancake and ate it in big bites. The red-robed Suing stood in the middle of the courtyard. Su Fingnian mumbled, "Turn around." The red pancake spun non-stop, pleasing to the eye. Su Fingnian smiled brightly. After the head of the secretariat, Qi Yanglong, left the imperial astronomer, the old man was personally led by the head eunuch of the ceremony directorate, Song Tonglu, to a small hall located between the inner and outer court of Liang, the Hall of Immortality. The newly built Hall of Immortality was located in the inner court, but it was closely connected to the outer court. In addition, there were a total of 12 scholars who handled government affairs near the Hall of Immortality. This made the Hall of Immortality, which had been abandoned for many years, into a veritable central location. The Hall of Immortality did not take up much space. It was in the shape of an I shape, a typical front hall and back bedroom. In the hall hung a large plaque with the words "Fair and Peaceful" written by the late Emperor Zhao Dun. Recently, the small court meetings that the young emperor personally hosted had all been moved here. The introductions of important officials were also carried out here. A number of newly appointed officials, such as Tianzong, Dong Gong, and Huang Weidong, the leader of the old Green Party of the previous dynasty, Hong Lingshu, the general of Nanjiang who had replaced Liu Baijie as the Minister of War, and the head of the Ping family of Liaodong who had succeeded Han Lin as the Assistant Minister of Justice, had all come here to meet the emperor. When Qi Yanglong stepped into the Hall of Immortality, Huan Wen, the head of the province, and Chen Wang, the assistant of the scattered left cavalry, were already present. Zhao Yuling, who was in charge of the secretariat, and Yin Mao Chen, the heavenly official of the Ministry of Personnel, who had different political views, were also present. However, the two of them stood far apart. Not only did they not have a harmonious atmosphere, but they also seemed to be estranged from each other. Of the 6 grand scholars, only Wen Shouren, the grand scholar of the Hall of Wuying, and Yan Jieshi, the grand scholar of the Dongyuan Pavilion, were present. None of the newly established grand scholar of the Guanga Pavilion showed up. Other than that, there was also Zhao Yang, the commandery prince of Changshan, Gao Shizhi, the Duke of Yan, and Song Downing, the Marquis of Huaiyang. For ordinary officials of Liang, these 3 were low-key people who had long heard of their names but never met. Compared to these important people who either held the power of the court or had a thunderous reputation, the left assistant minister of the Ministry of War, Tang Taizuang, was still a junior even though he had a lot of power. Therefore, his position was at the back, and he stood right next to Wen Tai, the leader of the Green Party in Great and City. Wen Tai was a legendary figure in the Great and City officialdom. He sat on the seat of the assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel and hadn't moved from his seat for more than 10 years. He had worked for 3 ministers of the Ministry of Personnel, so there was always a joke in the Ministry of Personnel that the Minister of Flowing Water, the Assistant Minister of Iron. Even Tantanon often used old Assistant Minister of Wen to tease Wen Tai. Therefore, almost everyone forgot that this old assistant minister was not yet 50 years old. Chapter 1646. Qi Yanglong had actually stopped outside the room for a moment. If it were someone else, head eunuch Song Tonglu would have hurriedly urged him to hurry up. However, it was a different matter if it was the head of the secretariat. Song Tonglu stood quietly outside the room with the old man. Inside the room came the old scholar Wen Shouren's signature loud voice. It was full of vigor. It was hard to believe that this was the voice of an old man. The noble old man who led the hall said with grief and indignation, "Your Majesty, the Northern Liang barbarians are really rude. Not only did they discredit the Ministry of Rights, they even made a scene at the imperial astronomer. The imperial court can't tolerate him anymore. Otherwise, where will the imperial court's face be? Your Majesty, although this old subject is a scholar, I still have a set of old bones and a backbone that does not weaken despite my age." This old subject will go to the Demoyai courier station alone and arrest that barbarian and throw him into prison. If he dares to kill anyone, then kill this old subject as well. I only hope that your majesty will punish him for this later. Even if this old subject dies, it will be a worthy death. Song Tonglu lowered his gaze, but the head of the Hall of Secretaries rolled his eyes too obviously. The head eunuch could still see it clearly. Inside the room, Zhao Yang, the commandery prince of Chongshan, who was about the same age as Wen Shoren, looked at the juniors beside him, Duke Gao and Marquis Song. The latter two were obviously speechless. The three of them had closed their doors and refused to ask about the imperial court for too many years. Their circle of activity was limited to the nobles and the relatives of the emperor. They had almost no contact with outside officials. In the past, they had only heard that Grand Scholar Wen was unyielding in the imperial court. Today, they saw him in a new light. The old commandery prince of Chongshan slowly withdrew his gaze and frowned. As an old member of the Liang royal family, Zhao Yang, the commandery prince of Chongshan, had personally experienced the beginning and end of the Spring and Autumn War. When the emperor bestowed rewards, Zhao Yang, who should have been in the top 10 in terms of contributions, only received a humiliating title of commandery prince because of a secret matter. After that, he began to play with flowers, birds, fish, and insects in peace, leisurely enjoying the rest of his life. There were very few men in the manner of Chongshan commandery prince. Over time, this old commandery prince was completely forgotten. If Song Downing, who could barely be called a young and healthy man, was going to make a big move when he returned to the court, then the old commandery prince at this age seemed to be just doing his best. Grand Scholar Wen, who was famous for carrying the coffin and remonstrating to death, began to count the major crimes of the young king after the hereditary succession. He was impassioned and the room was full of righteousness. This Wuying Palace Grand Secretary was obviously going to fight to the death with the Su family. There had been rumors in Graydon City for many years that Grand Scholar Wen was so paranoid that he did not have a good attitude toward any official in Jingdo with the surname Su. One of the two biggest topics of discussion in Graydon City in the past half a year had to do with the Wen family. It was said that the granddaughter of the Grand Scholar Wen, who was spoiled to the heavens, not only said that she wanted to go to the northwest to see the new Prince Liang, she almost really ran away from home and successfully eloped. Sir Wen was so angry that he fell seriously ill and was bedridden for half a year. During this time, Jean Lanting of the Ministry of Rights had visited him no less than 3 times. However, looking at Wen Shoren's vigor, it did not seem like it. The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Appointments, Wen Tai, was in this room. Although his rank was the same as Chen Wang and Tang Tai's Huang, even he knew the difference. As one of the 3 chariots of the Green Party, of the other 2, Liu Feiqi of Shangzhou State had passed away. The Liu family had married into Beiliang and moved to Beiliang. The general of Qingzhou, Hong Lingshu, had entered Jingdo from a local area. It was not clear whether the overall power of the Green Party had increased or decreased. However, the present emperor wanted to reappoint officials of the Green Party. This was an undeniable trend. Wei Dong, who had also come from Qingzhou, had just become the #1 person in the Guangling Navy and Qingzhou Navy. This conjecture was confirmed. Yin Mao Chen had not been in charge of the Ministry of Appointments for long. It was not very likely that Wen Tai, the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Appointments, would become the heavenly official of Liang. However, it was not impossible for him to be the leader of another department. He had a certain chance of being in charge of the Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Works, and Ministry of Revenue. Today, Wen Tai's sudden appearance here caused Zhao Yuling and Yin Mao Chen to look at him a few more times. The young emperor did not interrupt when the scholar's impassioned speech of righteousness and plain-spoken integrity. However, when Qi Yanglong crossed the threshold, the group of powerful officials turned their heads in unison and made Wen Shoren stop himself. He followed the others and bowed respectfully to the head of the secretariat. Qi Yanglong stood where the Grand Secretary should stand. After bowing to the emperor, he said concisely, "I have just seen the king of Beiliang. He has agreed to leave Jingdou the day after tomorrow. Regarding the lifting of the ban on the transport of grain, the king of Beiliang hopes that the court can send 500,000 dan of grain to Beiliang before autumn next year." A trace of confusion appeared in Huan Wen's eyes. He couldn't help but turn his head to look at the head of the palace secretariat standing beside him. He noticed that when Qi Yanglong said the number 500,000 dan, the palm in his sleeve made a small gesture in front of him. Commandery Prince Changshan's eyelids drooped in disappointment. As for the reason, probably only the old commandery prince himself knew. Tang Taizhuang of the Ministry of War, who was sitting at the very back, smiled coldly. "You, Su Fengnian, have caused such a great storm in Great Peace City, yet you only dare to ask for 500,000 dan of grain from the court. Could it be that Great Peace City is no longer your territory and you don't even have the courage to ask for an exorbitant price?" The young emperor sitting on the couch breathed gently. A smile flashed across his face. He swept his gaze over the important officials of Liang and asked calmly, "Dear officials, what do you think?" When Shoren was about to jump out and scold the new prince of Liang when he heard Chen Wang, who was standing in the same row as him and Yan Jieshi, speak first. "I believe that the king of Beiliang is the king of Beiliang, and the people of Beiliang are the people of Beiliang. The 500,000 dan of grain can agree to lift the ban and send it to the way of Beiliang." When Shoren immediately closed his mouth and swallowed back the grand speech that was about to come out of his mouth. The old scholar was able to put on the airs of an old official of 3 dynasties in front of Jin Sanlang, but for some reason, when Shoren felt uneasy about Qin Xiaobao, whom he had never interacted with before. When they met occasionally, he would take the initiative to be friendly. Unfortunately, official Qin never showed any signs of looking at him in a different light. This made Wen Shoren feel regret deep in his heart, as well as some unknown apprehension. Commandery Prince Changshan, Xiao Yang, who had not spoken in court for many years, said coldly, "Your Majesty, the Beiliang soldiers who died fighting outside the pass are worthy of 500,000 dan of grain as a reward. It would not be too much to say that lifting the ban and sending 1 million dan of grain is not an exaggeration. But this Su Fengnian, as a vassal king, has no regard for the law and the capital. We cannot make an exception and encourage his arrogance. Thus, I believe that not a single dan of grain can be given to Su Fengnian." The Grand Secretary of Dongyuan Pavilion, Yan Jieshi, also agreed, "Your Majesty, I agree with Commandery Prince Changshan's opinion. The Beiliang people and soldiers have performed meritorious deeds, but the king of Beiliang has made a grave mistake. Thus, meritorious deeds and demerits should offset each other, and the rewards and punishments should be clear. This is in accordance with the laws of the imperial court." Tang Taizhuang said in a low voice, "Your Majesty, I am willing to personally escort the king of Beiliang out of the capital and its environs today." The young emperor did not comment. He looked around and finally saw Wen Tai, who was standing at the back and was half a head shorter than Assistant Minister Tang. He asked warmly, "Assistant Minister Wen, do you have anything to say?" Wen Tai said without hesitation, "I believe that the lifting of the ban on Beiliang's transport of grain can be given, but not too much. It can be done slowly but not urgently." There was a secret room on the right side of the Hall of Spiritual Cultivation. On the wall of the secret room's west door, there was a large map with the names of officials written in small characters. It took up more than half of the wall. A young man stood at the bottom of the wall. He raised his head, but his eyes were tightly shut. He was a blind man dressed in white who stood at the center of Liang. Although the young blind man could not see the contents of the map, he could feel the indescribable grandeur. In the Liang dynasty, almost all important officials, whether civil or military, would have a place on the map as long as they reached the threshold of the 4th rank. From the capital to the various provinces and counties, from the 3 provinces and 6 ministries to the provincial governors and governors, from the great general of punitive expedition to the general of a province, they were all written on the map. Among them, there were very few names and their official positions. 2 concise and comprehensive evaluations were written in black and red small characters. One came from Yin Mao Chen, and the other came from Zhao Guo. The young blind man looked at the map as if he was looking at the whole of Liang. When he heard Wen Taiyi's strategy of not too much, not too little. It can be done slowly but not urgently, the young man smiled knowingly. He approved of the strategy, but also mocked it playfully. The young emperor said, "The matter of the transport of grain will be discussed tomorrow. Today, I want to discuss with everyone the candidate for the Jinggan Dao's magistrate." Almost everyone understood. No wonder Assistant Minister Wen would make an exception and make an appearance today. There was nothing to discuss. Nowadays, when it came to the promotion of officials, the young emperor's words carried enormous weight. The head of the secretariat, Qi Yanglong, and the provincial governor, Huan Wen, never had any objections. In addition, Chen Wang, who never missed a small court meeting, and Yin Mao Chen, who always understood tacitly, all appointments went smoothly. Thus, even if Wen Taiyi, who was born in Qingzhou, was sent out to be the head of the civil officials of Jinggan Dao, which slightly violated the rules of Liang, no one would use such a trivial matter to argue with the emperor. Moreover, Wen Taiyi had been the second in command of the Ministry of Appointments responsible for distributing official hats for more than a decade. Who was willing to offend this future, young magistrate with deep roots? Not yet 50 years old, but jumping ranks from assistant minister of the 6 ministries to local magistrate, he was clearly going to return to court. His future was promising. Perhaps within 10 years at most, there would be another rank 2 big boss in the capital. When Shorin quickly proposed that Assistant Minister Wen was the best candidate. Who did not know that the great and great Wens of Great Peace City were famous for being inseparable? Chapter 1647. After the emperor made the final decision, Wen Taiyi naturally knelt down to thank him and shed tears of gratitude. After Wen Taiyi, who was about to return to his hometown as the Jinggan magistrate, stood up, a tall old general wearing the robes of a standard second-rank military official walked into the room. After bowing and asking for forgiveness, he stood near Tang Taizuang without saying a word. Gao Shizhi and Song Downing quietly looked at each other and smiled. The Minister of War had actually held himself back from complaining on the spot. Most likely, other than the 2 grand secretaries and the newly promoted Wen Taiyi, most of the people present had already heard of the disturbance in the Jingji Southern Army camp. The Southern Expedition General's men had suffered heavy casualties. They only knew that 2 martial arts grandmasters who used spears had fought. As for who it was, they didn't even see their faces. What followed was a tepid question-and-answer session. The young emperor focused on asking Wu Zhongshuan about the recent situation of the Guangling War. An hour later, this far-reaching court meeting ended. Only Qi Yanglong, Huan Wen, Chen Wang, and Wu Zhongshuan remained. Emperor Zhao Zhuan led the 3 civil officials into the secret room. The 2 old men were stunned when they saw the young man. Zhao Zhuan smiled and introduced him. "This is Lu Su, from Qingzhou. He is very knowledgeable. My original intention was for Mr. Lu to become one of the teachers of the diligent room, but Mr. Lu refused. So that Mr. Lu temporarily does not have an official position to teach in the diligent room." The blind Lu Su stood beside the emperor and said calmly, "Greetings, my lords." Huan Wen nodded and smiled but didn't say anything. Qi Yanglong was expressionless and made a low sound of acknowledgement. The diligent room was the study place of the emperor's descendants. Was this to pave the way for the white-robed minister? Huan Wen suddenly looked at Qi Yanglong and asked, "Lord Head of the Secretariat, since we're here, why don't we get straight to the point?" Previously, Qi Yanglong had said in front of a large group of people that Beiliang had begged the court for 500,000 stones of grain transport. Of course, it was to help the young emperor gain face. When Shorin, this stupid scholar, would take it seriously. Many others were also skeptical, but Tantanon would never take it seriously. Qi Yanglong pretended to be confused and looked around. Where did this skylight come from? Huanwen was fuming with rage. He wanted to settle accounts with the head of the secretariat. Zhao Zhuan already smiled and said, I plan to allow Beiliang to transport millions of shur of grain. In the future, Wen Tai, who oversees Qingzhou, will have full authority to handle this matter. Sir Qi, Tantanon, is this appropriate? Qi Yanglong nodded. Huanwen pondered for a moment. That's the only way. Zhao Zhuan turned to look at the Minister of War, who was filled with a murderous aura. General Wu has been wronged. I will have people thoroughly investigate the matter of the Jingji Southern Army camp. Before General Wu returns to Guangling Road, I will definitely give you an explanation. Wu Zhongshuan cupped his fists and said, Since your Majesty has such intentions, this general has nothing to say. Please rest assured, Your Majesty, this general is not the kind of official who cannot see the big picture. Zhao Zhuan looked satisfied. Huanwen hesitated and finally couldn't help but ask, Your Majesty, whether it is Wen Tai or the King of Jing'an, they all have old grievances with Beiliang's Su family. If they overlook official business for personal reasons and delay the important matters of the court, what will happen then? Zhao Zhuan smiled and said, The King of Jing'an and Zhao Sun are undoubtedly loyal. Wen Tai's knowledge and achievements are praised. After taking on this important task, I believe that he will not dare to be careless in the matter of the transport. Huanwen continued unabashedly, Our Liang's transport is divided into north and south. The southern transport is mainly based on the Guangling River, while the northern transport is mainly based on the canals. This has also given rise to two stubborn factions. Wen Tai had a deep grudge with the head of the southern transport in his early years. I'm afraid that even if Wen Tai is sincere in his work, the southern transport will make things difficult for him from top to bottom. Furthermore, the Qingzhou General Hong Lingshu, who could originally balance the transport of more than 100,000 troops, is now in the capital. In Lao Chen's opinion, if Wen Tai is appointed as the Jinggan Dao Jingshi, we still need to send a deputy Jidushi, whose prestige is not weak. Other than intimidating the snakes and insects in the hinterland of the Central Plains, we can also conveniently clean up the mud that has accumulated for many years in the south. Although Huanwen was somewhat overbearing, Zhao Zhuan still nodded with a smile. If that's the case, what does Tantanon think of Anong General Ma Xianliang leaving the capital to take up the post of deputy Jidushi? Huanwen was somewhat surprised. Chen Wang was about to speak. Whether it was his ability to lead troops in battle, his reputation in the army, or his family background, Ma Zhongxian's promotion from a third-rank Anshi general to a second-rank deputy Jidushi in the vassal king's territory, as well as a promotion within the military official system, there were no major problems to be found. However, as the son of Ma Lulang, Ma Zhongxian's departure would be enough to suppress the transport officials. Perhaps he could really take back the power of the transport from the hands of the various nobles and return it to the imperial court. However, this would inevitably go against the original intention of ensuring the smooth transport of the transport. Wen Tai and the Beiliang Su family didn't get along. Wasn't this even more so? Just as Chen Wang was thinking about what to say, he suddenly felt his sleeve being pulled. Turning his head, he saw Lu Su looking ahead, as if he didn't reach out to stop Chen Wang. Chen Wang was very cautious and quickly dismissed the idea of advising him. At the same time, Chen Wang was somewhat shocked. How did Lu Su know that he was going to speak? After another hour, the officials left the secret chamber. Wu Zhongshuan smiled and said goodbye to the other four, taking large strides away. Qi Yanglong and Huanwen walked side by side. As the old man of the diligent department, Chen Wang led the newcomer Lu Su there. The two old men and the two newcomers happened to be walking in different directions, with their backs facing each other. Chen Wang said softly, "Thank you." Lu Su's expression was indifferent, as if he didn't hear. On the other side, Huan Wen, who didn't need the palace eunuchs to lead the way, sighed emotionally. "It's different now." Qi Yanglong said something disrespectful. "What, is Tantanon unhappy that your majesty isn't the emperor?" Huan Wen said angrily, "Bullshit." The head of the secretariat pretended to sniff. "The autumn air is refreshing, the osmanthus fragrance refreshes the mind. Where did this stinky fart come from?" Huan Wen snorted coldly and quickened his pace, obviously unwilling to continue walking side by side with the head of the secretariat. Qi Yanglong didn't stop him, but also quickened his pace, laughing softly. "At the imperial astronomer, the king of Bailiang personally praised my knowledge as the best in the world. Tantanon, what do you think?" Huan Wen turned his head to look at the head of the secretariat, who was full of pride, and said disdainfully, "Who are you trying to fool?" This time, it was Qi Yanglong's turn to stride forward. Huan Wen looked at the back of this figure and muttered, "Is that kid blind? Or does this old man have a beautiful granddaughter at home, and that kid is thinking about her?" When the lady boss of Jiu restaurant was personally led into the small courtyard by Su Yanbing, she saw a scene that made her not know whether to laugh or cry. The king of Bailiang was sitting on a small bench, scrubbing his extremely luxurious royal robe. The problem was that the young man's movements were very skillful. Su Fingnian had just finished washing the clothes. After wringing them dry, he quickly dried them on the bamboo poles that had already been set up in the courtyard. He wiped his hands and said with a smile, "Aunt Hong is here. Sit anywhere, there are only 2 chairs anyway." Then Su Fingnian also smiled at the young woman beside the lady. "I see Miss Chen again so soon." Jia and Su Ying, who were squatting in the corridor, were playing chess. After seeing the lady and Qin Yu, they didn't pay much attention and lowered their heads to continue playing chess. Jia's chess pieces were placed in the upside-down mink hat, and Su Ying's chess pieces were in the big robe. The lady boss was sitting on the rattan chair. Qin Yu originally wanted to stand beside Aunt Hong, but she didn't expect that the young king would choose a position close to the 2 strange women. He squatted lazily against the pillar, waved his hand and said with a smile, "Miss Chen also sit." The lady boss went straight to the point. "Fingnian, I heard that you only asked for 500,000 share of grain from the imperial court." Chapter 1648. Su Fingnian was amused. He smiled and said, "That's not true. It's Qi Yanglong, that old fox, who doesn't respect his elders, who thick-skinned asked me not to be too ruthless. He promised that before autumn next year, there would be at least 1 million dawn of grain to cool down. As for the 500,000 dawn, I suppose the head of the Hall of Secretaries wanted to save some face for the imperial court. In any case, when the time comes, I will definitely bring tens of thousands of Bailiang cavalry to charge into Guangling Road." After thinking about it, I decided not to go too far, so I agreed. Now that I think about it, I have let him down. If there is a chance in the future, I will definitely apologize in person. The proprietress was dumbfounded. After a long silence, she finally scolded with a smile, "How shameless, but Aunt Hong likes it." Chen Yu's heart trembled. Tens of thousands of Bailiang cavalry charging into Guangling Road. What did this mean? Su Fingnian glanced at Jia and Su Ying's unconstrained chess moves and shouted, "Play here, play here." He then took out a chess piece from Jia's mink hat and helped to place it. When he saw Su Ying's resentful gaze, he quickly repeated, play here," and also helped to place the chess piece. Chen Yu stared with wide eyes, somewhat dazed. It was clearly 2 lines of, "You don't care about me, I don't care about you." Could this be considered a chess player? While Su Fingnian was playing chess, he took the time to smile and say, "Aunt Hong, don't be angry about the matter of the imperial astronomer. It's not good to be angry, it's easy to get wrinkles. Aunt Hong is still young. If you go out with me and I call her sister, the passers-by will think that I'm old. They might even beat me up with righteous indignation. Aunt Hong smiled and rubbed the crow's feet at the corner of her eyes. She nodded vigorously, yes, 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 that is true. Chen Yu quietly took a deep breath. Aunt Hong suddenly laughed softly. Fingnian, am I your Aunt Hong? Su Fingnian acted as if he was facing a great enemy. He immediately got up and ran behind the woman, carefully massaging her shoulders. Aunt Hong, is something the matter? Truth be told, don't look at how lively I am right now. I'm just pretending to be fine for the imperial court to see. After all, I'm in the capital, surrounded by enemies on all sides. Once I'm exposed, I'll be in danger. Right now, it's very difficult for me to even walk. It's just that I don't want Aunt Hong to worry. Aunt Hong shouted to the man standing at the entrance of the courtyard, Su Yanbing, your prince said that he can't walk anymore. I want to invite him to the Jiuzhou embassy. Why don't you carry our prince to the carriage? Su Yanbing smiled and said, this. Su Fengnian hurriedly signaled with his eyes. But Su Yanbing still said straightforwardly, no problem. Who was the one who said, what a fast gun, at the entrance of the imperial astronomer? Su Fengnian said with a sullen face, Aunt Hong, are you really not afraid of causing trouble? I'll be leaving the capital the day after tomorrow. When that time comes, do you still want to continue operating the Jiuzhou embassy? Aunt Hong suddenly stood up and pulled Su Fengnian towards the entrance of the courtyard. The helpless king of Beiliang turned his head and said to the women who were playing chess, I'll bring you delicious food when I come back. When the group of people walked out of the Weiwei embassy and towards the small carriage, even Aunt Hong and Chen Yu could hear countless screams from the distant streets. Some of the cries were heart-wrenching and could be sung and wept. Su Fengnian, who originally wanted to ride a horse to the Jiuzhou embassy with Su Yanbing, immediately lost the idea. Then, he heard Aunt Hong say with a smile, look, how can the Jiuzhou embassy's business not be popular in the future? When the time comes, Aunt Hong will charge 100 taels of silver for the seats you sat on. Whoever offers the highest price can sit on them. Moreover, you can only sit for an hour. How about it? Su Fengnian smiled awkwardly, Aunt Hong, I suddenly feel a little unwell. Tomorrow. I'll definitely go to the Jiuzhou embassy to look for Aunt Hong tomorrow. Aunt Hong glared fiercely at him. Without any explanation, she pulled him into the carriage. Su Yanbing rode a horse and escorted them. Looking at the maddened women crowding at the window, many of them had even rushed to the streets. Su Yanbing felt that the road ahead was so bumpy. Aunt Hong and Chen Yu sat side by side. Su Fengnian sat timidly in the opposite corner. Aunt Hong joked, Fengnian, have you not thought of picking a few beautiful wives to bring back to Beiliang? Chen Yu turned her head and looked at the curtain. Su Fengnian said with a headache, Aunt Hong, please spare me. On the main street of the Weiwei embassy, the carriage moved like a tortoise. Outside the window, there were voices calling out, Brother Su. Su Fengnian touched his forehead. This time, there was really cold sweat. Aunt Hong suddenly asked, the two large formations of the imperial astronomer have been destroyed. Su Fengnian didn't know how Aunt Hong got to know about this secret. He nodded and said, more than half of it was destroyed because Duke Yanqing gave me something that preserved the vital qi of Liyang and didn't let Xie Guining have his way. However, the one surnamed Xie did not have it easy either. That broken bowl was destroyed by me, and then Dong Tai targeted it. That sword probably made Xie Guining run all the way to the south of Guangling River. All in all, the energy of Liyang still exists, but there are changes. If there are no accidents, the leader of the Qi cultivators of the northern lands has already told that young emperor. The strangest thing about me is this. He actually did not denounce me for this. Maybe Xie Guining is behind this again. At the time, I did not expect that Bull Rider to come to Great Peace City. I planned to use the chance that the first-generation ancestral master of Longhu Mountain thought he could return to the Gate of Heaven to charge through the Gate of Heaven and kill more immortals. So I did not chase after Xie Guinying. If I had known earlier, I would have chased after him for a few hundred li. Aunt Hong sighed and said, such a big heart, just like your father. Su Fengnian grinned. Sensing that Qin Yu was staring at him, Su Fengnian joked, what, Miss Chen does not recognize the beggar who led the horse a few years ago. Qin Yu said honestly, I do not recognize him. When they arrived at the Jiuzhou embassy, they found that for the first time, it was deserted. Aunt Hong smiled and said, we closed at noon, not willing to serve that group of masters. Today, Auntie Hong will make an exception and cook for you personally. After unlocking the door and entering, Aunt Hong quickly closed the door. Su Fengnian suddenly saw a woman with a black hat standing not far away. Su Fengnian stilled and quickly walked in front of her. He said softly, Aunt, why have you come? Even though Zhao Guo is in a terrible state and cannot attend to many places, it is inevitable that there will be people watching the Jiuzhou embassy. The woman took off her black hat, her face still covered by armor. She was Wu Su's sword attendant back then, Zhao Yute. Su Fengnian met her at the Qingqing Mountains Qingyang Palace during his second tour of the Jianghu. She had personally handed the red sandalwood sword case that contained the Great Liang's dragon sparrow sword to Su Fengnian. Her voice was hoarse as she said, I shouldn't have let you come, but Aunt just wants to see you. Su Fengnian said with a childish expression, I can go to the Imperial Astronomer whenever I want to. Even if Aunt wants to see me in the palace, I can still go there. Aunt Hong smiled and said, all right, aren't you tired? Sit down and talk. I'll go to the kitchen and wait for an hour. You two can have a good chat. Chen Yu wanted to help, but she was pushed back from the curtain by Aunt Hong. Chen Yu could only choose a bench and sit down quietly. Zhao Yute was just about to talk about the puppet Wu Lingxiu when Su Fengnian said happily, Aunt, when are you going back to Beiliang? Now that Huang Man has grown up, Aunt, let me tell you a secret. There's a Beimang woman who really has good taste. She took a liking to Huang Man at first glance and shamelessly wants to be Huang Man wife. She can't be stopped or beaten away. Her status isn't simple either. Of course, I don't have any prejudice against her, but I'm happy for Huang Man As Huang Man's older brother, of course I can't be too polite to her when we meet. Otherwise, what if Huang Man can't control her in the future, right? So I purposely put on a stern face and picked on her, scaring that woman into a daze. That feeling was really good. It made me secretly happy. Second sister also misses you, Aunt. If I can bring Aunt back this time, she'll definitely be overjoyed. Listening to his long-winded chatter, Zhao Yute took off the brass mask that had covered her face for more than 20 years, revealing her hideous face. But she didn't care, and neither did he. When Aunt Hong shouted that the dishes were served from behind the curtain, Zhao Yute said softly, Aunt, you still have to keep an eye on the Wu father and son. That pair of father and son are the kind of people who don't know when to stop. We can't let all our efforts go to waste. Su Fengnian shook his head, his eyes resolute. Aunt, come home with me. Don't worry about them. Beiliang doesn't need these schemes anymore. Zhao Yute also shook her head. After so many years of planning, it's a pity to give up now. Su Fengnian smiled brightly. Aunt, when I officially get married, what will I do if there's no one at home? Aunt Hong, who was holding a plate with one hand and lifting the curtain with the other, burst into tears when she heard this. Chapter 1649. When Su Fengnian left the Jiuzhou embassy, the sky was filled with burning clouds. Looking up, it looked like a magnificent Sichuan brocade stacked together. Beautiful scenery, famous generals, heroes, and meritorious officials. Everything was gone. The carriage belonged to the lady boss. Su Yanbing abandoned the horse and became the coachman again. Other than Su Fengnian, there was also a graceful woman with a veil covering her face in the carriage. Originally, Su Fengnian did not want to take over this hot potato, but Aunt Hong's words convinced him. There were always some women in the world who wanted to live for themselves, but it was often difficult for them to do so. I, Aunt Hong, would not ask for other men, but with Fengnian, I will not treat you as an outsider. Take her to Beiliang. You don't have to care where she wants to go after that. The two did not speak along the way. Chen Yu was in a daze, and Su Fengnian was busy regulating the qi in his body. It was probably more strenuous than the Guangling River flood control in Liang. When they returned to the Demoyai embassy, Su Fengnian arranged for her to stay in a secluded courtyard, not too far from his. When they parted, Chen Yu stared at Su Fengnian with her limpid eyes before he turned to leave. Su Fengnian smirked. Didn't that Liao King Zhao Wu want to marry you as a princess? I have a grudge with him. If he is unhappy, I will be happy. She blinked. You want to make him a cuckold? Su Fengnian said seriously, as long as you can beat me, that's it. Chen Yu's lips curled up. What a pity. Su Fengnian nodded in agreement. Yes, yes. Unfortunately, my martial arts cultivation is passable. Ordinary people can't get close to me. Chen Yu pretended to be angry and clenched her fist. Su Fengnian seemed to have remembered some of the painful past when he was traveling in Jianghu. Heroine, don't hit my face. I have to rely on it for a living. Chen Yu snorted coldly, turned around nimbly, and said calmly, you didn't have the guts to steal before, but now you don't even have the heart to steal anymore. It seems that the saying that a skilled person is bold is a lie. When Chen Yu was far away, Su Yanbing teased, you can't even hold your tongue. Is it because you cultivated the great yellow court of Wudong Mountain years ago? Su Fengnian sneered, how is that possible? Do you know that in Yanji prefecture of Yuzhou province? Su Yanbing nodded and said, yes, I know. Yu Dilong said it before. Chu Lushan, Yuan's Wazong, Yan Wenwan, and maybe Bai Yu and Song Dongming also know about it. Su Fengnian finally understood why Yan Wenwan, Chen Yinchue, and the others looked at him strangely when they passed by Xiaoguang city of Yuzhou province. Su Fengnian gritted his teeth and said, Yu Dilong, you little bastard who deceives his master and destroys his ancestors. Just you wait. Su Yanbing seemed to be talking to himself, honest words are unpleasant to the ear. Su Fengnian said helplessly, Uncle Su, you are not honest. You are not behaving like a grandmaster while my realm is declining. Su Yanbing patted Su Fengnian's shoulder with a serious expression. Just when Su Fengnian thought that the most unknown martial saint of the Liang dynasty was going to say something, Su Yanbing said earnestly, Your Highness, it's enough that you have the demeanor of a grandmaster. Oh right, can you ask those crazy ladies outside the post house to leave? I just want to buy a bottle of green ant wine in peace. Su Fengnian said firmly, this, I really can't. Su Yanbing left with a big laugh. Su Fengnian thought for a while and jumped to the roof of the small courtyard. He lay down and looked at the splendid burning clouds. Jia and Su Ying sat on his left and right. With Su Fengnian between them, they stretched out their hands and played a game of 15, 50, and 20. Just as Su Fengnian was about to take a break and close his eyes to rest, he noticed that Deputy Ma Wei was standing uneasily at the entrance of the small courtyard. He was looking into the courtyard with his head shrunk back and his hands were holding a small pouch. Su Fengnian went to him and asked with a smile, What's wrong? Deputy Ma Wei looked as if he had lost his parents and cried miserably, Your Highness, I just found out that there was no green ant wine in the post house, so I wanted to go to the restaurant on the street to buy a few jars. I didn't expect that before I entered the door, I would be blocked by a group of women. They were either the daughters of the Marquis, the nieces of the assistant minister, or the relatives of some general. I really couldn't afford to offend them. They stuffed a lot of things into my hands. Not only did they give me a stack of letters, there were also fans, combs, hairpins, embroidered balls, jade pendants, and sachets. They even said that it was their first time using a rouge box, the first time they read a forbidden book, and even a gold-embroidered knife and hair cut with the knife. It's not that this humble one didn't want to refuse, but this group of women, in addition to the golden branches and jade leaves, there were also several heroines and fairies. Looking at their attitude, if this humble one didn't accept, they would break this humble one's hands and feet. This humble one almost didn't make it back to the Dima way alive. There was a young lady from some noble family who almost gave this humble one a zither to the prince. This humble one really escaped death. Su Fengnian sighed and took the heavy pouch from the deputy Ma Wei's hands. This pouch turned out to be a woman's luxurious cloak. When the young king turned around, the deputy Ma Wei carefully said, "Your Highness, it seems that when I was busy, I also took a few things wrapped in a pomegranate skirt or a satin gown. Inside, there should be a woman's embroidered shoes, as well as a close-fitting tee." Without waiting for the king of Bailiang to come back to his senses, the deputy Ma Wei didn't care about etiquette and ran away. Su Fengnian reflexively turned his head. The girl sitting on the roof was laughing non-stop. Su Fengnian calmly threw the pouch, full of feelings, on the ground at the door. He clapped his hands and walked into the courtyard with a hand full of fragrance. He thought to himself that the people of Ma Wei shouldn't be so stupid as to really destroy it all. In fact, it wasn't bad to have some letters and love letters to pass the time. The next moment, Jia Jiajia left the roof and stood near the pouch. He raised his foot and looked like he was going to step on it. Su Fengnian turned his head and turned his head again, not looking. When Su Fengnian returned to the rattan chair to lie down, he saw out of the corner of his eye that his daughter was squatting at the door. Su Ying was also squatting at the side. The two women seemed to have found a treasure trove there, turning it over and over. It was a mess, and for some reason, Chen Yu also came to the door, fanning the flames, giving pointers, and teaching. Su Fengnian grimaced and closed his eyes. In fact, the corners of his mouth were full of a warm smile. When they had dinner together, Su Yanbing drank the green ant wine that the deputy Ma Wei went through a lot of trouble to buy. He held back his laughter and used all his strength to stop himself from adding insult to injury. Because other than Qin Yu, who was still considered to be a proper decoration, Jia Jiajia and Su Ying's heads were full of hairpins. The jewelry was so dazzling that it could blind people's eyes. There was also a lot of makeup on their faces. It was even better than the burning clouds in the evening sky today. Chen Yu threw a charming and provocative look at the young king whose mouth was twitching. The latter nodded and praised against his conscience, "Beautiful." Chapter 1650. They finally made it through this dinner. The small courtyard in the night was quiet and serene. Chen Yu lay on a rattan chair. Su Fengnian and Su Yanbing sat on a small stool at the top of the steps, each holding a jug of wine. Su Ying was spinning and dancing, and Jia Jiajia was spinning in circles around her. Su Yanbing said emotionally, "If there is a day when the people of Bailiang can live as peacefully as the people of Great Peace City, it would be good." Su Fengnian drank a mouthful of the green ant wine that was not as authentic as the one in Bailiang. "It is not easy, but since we won this year, we have something to think about." Su Yanbing, who rarely spoke heartfelt words, took a big gulp of wine. "I am an ordinary man who only cares about the martial path. Even though I was a retainer of the great general in the past because of my sect, I never cared about the country or the world. I always felt that if I had a pair of fists and a body of martial arts, I would either break through the heavenly gate and ascend one day when I was bored, or I would die by someone's hand. Death is death no matter where it is. Even if there is no one to bury this body of mine, it does not matter." Later on, I took a walk behind Qingliang Mountain. At the time, there were not many names on the stone steels. I looked at those stone steels that were not tall and suddenly felt that I should leave my name here in the future. I did not read much, but I knew that no matter if it was official or unofficial history, no matter how many millions of words were left for later generations, no matter how many poems were written by scholars, the common people did not have a share. To leave one's name is as difficult as ascending to the heavens. It is even harder than ordinary Jianghu martial artists becoming great grandmasters. But we of Beiliang are different. We have 300,000 stone steels, and that, record of heroic spirits. Su Yanbing exhaled heavily. We of Beiliang are different. Su Fengnian had unknowingly finished his wine. He placed the flagon on his knees and folded his hands into his sleeves. He said softly, Uncle Su, no matter how heroic it is to die in battle, it can't compare to living well. Su Yanbing said with a smile, who doesn't die? Of course, no one wants to die if they can. But I have said before that our Beiliang is not the same, and is even more different from this great peace city. Su Fengnian remained silent. Su Yanbing turned his head and asked, what's wrong? Do you think those 100,000 plus border soldiers died in battle for you, Su Fengnian? Su Yanbing spat fiercely, don't be cocky, you brat. Do you really think that just because there are hundreds of women outside the Beiliang who are willing to die for you, that the 300,000 heavy cavalry of Beiliang are also in love with you, Su Fengnian? Maldiv *****, 300,000 border soldiers, those are all men who can run naked for a dozen li in the snow in the middle of winter. Su Fengnian laughed involuntarily. Chen Yu couldn't help but laugh, but then some fragmented sadness appeared in her eyes. This was probably a conversation unique to Beiliang men. It was like a Beiliang knife. It was not heavy, but it could cut off the heads of the 300,000 Beimang soldiers. There were not many Beiliang cavalry, but they were able to build an unprecedentedly large spectacle at the mouth of the gourd. Su Yanbing raised his head and drank a mouthful of wine. Liang only has Beiliang. If we don't fight to the death, how can we live? As long as you, Su Fengnian, don't let them die in vain, and don't retreat from the battle alone, then you are worthy of the 300,000 heavy cavalry. Su Fengnian laughed. Uncle Su, these words are too hurtful. Let's not talk about other things, just the fight with Tuoba Bodhisattva. I myself think it was quite earth-shattering. If that bastard Tuoba Bodhisattva didn't have someone to help him, his head would have been lost before Yang Yuanzhan's. Jia, who was still accompanying Su Ying, let out a heh. Su Fengnian quickly laughed. Next time when we fight, I'll definitely call you and let you clean up the mess. Su Yanbing poured the wine pot with all his might, but there was no more wine. Su Yanbing casually threw the wine pot high over the wall, then slowly got up and said, Su Yanbing has a presumptuous request. Su Fengnian said, Uncle Su, go ahead. Su Yanbing said calmly, don't be the king of Beiliang just because you're the son of Grand General Su Shao. Don't stand outside the pass just because you're the king of Beiliang. After saying this, Su Yanbing strode down the steps. When Su Yanbing reached the gate of the courtyard, Su Fengnian picked up the wine pot and gently tossed it to him. Su Yanbing caught the wine pot without even raising his head. Su Fengnian laughed. No problem. But just think of it as you owe me a pot of wine. How about it? Su Yanbing laughed. You owe me. Su Yanbing had been gone for a long time. Su Fengnian was all smiles as he rested his chin on his hand, watching the two women spinning in circles in the courtyard. Chen Yu broke the silence. I originally left Zhejiu Embassy with you only because Aunt Hong wanted me to go to Beiliang. To me, it doesn't matter where I go. I'm not lying to you about this. Su Fengnian grunted. I believe you. Chen Yu smiled sweetly. Her smile was so beautiful that it could bring disaster to the country and its people. Unfortunately, Su Fengnian did not turn around. She laughed. I heard that the snow in Beiliang is very heavy in winter, so heavy that it can even blow people away. Is that true? Su Fengnian shook his head. It's not that exaggerated, but the snow in Beiliang is really heavy. Chen Yu continued to laugh. Then I've really made up my mind to go to Beiliang. Su Fengnian nodded. Beiliang is not big and very poor, but it can definitely accommodate a woman who wants to see the snow. Chen Yu tilted her head and asked, that's all? Su Fengnian still nodded. That's all. Chen Yu's smile did not change. You really are different from before. Su Fengnian still nodded and added, I forgot to remind you that Beiliang is really poor. If you have money or dowry, don't forget to bring it because it's too heavy. When the time comes, I'll help you carry it. I'm not afraid of being tired. If it's not possible, I still have 800 white horses. This time, I came to Great Peace City and did not have to fight. Isn't this the style of the Beiliang cavalry? Chen Yu's chest trembled slightly. She gritted her teeth and said, it hasn't changed. Su Fengnian turned around and laughed as he clasped his fists. There was another period of silence. Chen Yu spoke again, the person in your heart, she's very beautiful, right? Su Fengnian did not nod this time. He seemed to be in a daze. After a long time, he said softly, of course she's beautiful. When I was very young, I liked her at first sight. But at that time, I didn't know what it meant to like her. I only knew how to bully her. Maybe I was afraid that she would not remember me. Chen Yu sighed softly. Suddenly, this young man turned around and smiled warmly. Also, she has dimples, you don't. For the first time, Chen Yu had the impulse to beat someone up. Su Fengnian turned his head again. His gaze seemed to pass through the courtyard walls, the walls of Great Peace City, the mountains and rivers, and looked towards the distant south. Chen Yu made a sound of acknowledgement. So it's her. No wonder you want to take the Beiliang cavalry to the Guangling Road. Su Fengnian said gently, I told her that I can bully her, and no one can bully her. She may not believe me, so I will prove it to her. Chen Yu felt slightly sad for no reason. So between men and women, the calm words that were said without much effort, had such weight. Actually, there was something that Su Fengnian did not say. In the future, he would not bully her. My little mud figure. Chapter 1651. Due to the misfortune of having 3 unusually diligent emperors, the morning court session in Liang continued year after year, day after day, without end. Due to the disappointment of too many of the top nobility of Great Peace City yesterday, today's court session was not as grand as yesterday's. However, compared to the cold autumn of the second year of Xiangfu, it was much livelier. At the same time, because of the addition of Wu Zhongshuan, Gao Shi, and Song Downing, as well as Changshan Commandery Prince Xiao Yang, who rose from the west, this morning's court session caused the eyes of many officials who had lost hope to light up. It felt like there was a light at the end of the tunnel. The sky had not brightened, and the gates had not opened. The civil and military officials who had gathered together were mostly whispering to each other. They said that old assistant minister Wen had finally succeeded. He was going to be sent out, promoted, and given a first-class position. However, some observant people had already noticed that Jin San Lang had yet to show his face. If it was in the past, that bearded and determined assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights would have long been standing near the main entrance, chatting and laughing with his colleagues. The Minister of Rights, Sima Puhua, and the Right Assistant Minister, Jiang Yongla, who everyone knew were estranged from each other, had gathered together today and even felt like they were family. This was an extremely rare occurrence. Other than the Ministry of War and the Ministry of Appointments, who didn't know that in the other 4 ministries of the Shangshu province, there was almost no minister and assistant minister who didn't have a knife hidden behind their smiles. One had a hard time improving, the other was waiting for a higher chair that was close at hand to sit on. It would be strange if they could dig out each other's hearts. Some of the older officials who were familiar with the court session took the chance to close their eyes and nap. After all, at the court session, as long as they were not normal officials who had the right to enter the hall, they could rest while they were far away from the emperor. But if they lost their etiquette, then it would be terrible. This was not something that had never happened before. Even if the censorate and directorate of rights closed one eye and closed the other, if you were lying on the ground, who other than a blind person could not see? Cultivating and the government, it was better to be safe than sorry. Suddenly, as if a heavy stone was thrown into a small lake, a burst of noise that should not have appeared quickly spread to the vicinity of the gate. Even the half-asleep elderly officials had to open their eyes to look. The news spread out layer by layer at an astonishing speed, as if it was 800 li away. They were indeed the most knowledgeable group of people in Liang. Even if the news passed through countless mouths, it was still accurate when it reached the vicinity of the assistant minister of the 6 ministries. However, a large number of women had appeared at this solemn place at the end of the imperial road. And most of them were young women in their prime. In different yamens, on different mountains, and in different positions, many high-ranking officials who had originally stayed out of the commotion suddenly had extremely ugly expressions on their faces. A few old officials with white hair were so angry that their lips turned purple. Among them were the Marquis of Yongle, the right assistant minister of the Ministry of Works, the general of Annan, the scholar of Chongwen Pavilion, and the grand secretary of Wuying Palace, Wenshuren. Apparently, among those women who wished for the world to be in chaos, there happened to be this illustrious and influential junior. Chen Wang's position was even further away from the gate than his official position. Beside him stood the poor Zhuangyuan scholar Li Jifu. The imperial uncle, Yan Qiji, even ran over to the Ministry of War's Kong Zhenrong, a military ruffian who was not liked by other departments. Without Jean Lanting, this leader who had the potential to become the new leader of the literary world, Gao Tingshu, Wu Tsongxian, and the others no longer gathered together. They stood in line according to their respective yamens. When Li Jifu heard the unbelievable truth, his eyes were somewhat dazed. Yan Qiji and Kong Zhenrong looked at each other and smiled, secretly bumping their fists. Gao Tingshu and the other handsome and elegant scholars of the capital who clung closely to the towering tree that was Jean Lanting mostly had gloomy expressions. Tang Taizhuang walked in front of the head of the secretariat and Tantanon and asked softly, "Two sirs, do you want me to have people drive those women away?" Tantanon hurriedly waved his hand and said with a smile, "Drive them away." Assistant Minister Tang, I advise you to forget about it. The Ministry of War is already struggling to make progress. Don't make trouble for yourself. Be careful not to be hated. Once there's a slip-up, you'll be criticized behind your back. Qi Yanglong also smiled and said, if the palace doesn't care, then Sir Tang shouldn't get involved. To tell the truth, even Tantanon and I can't afford to offend the powerful Rouge Army. The head of the secretariat raised the corner of his eye slightly and said with undisguised schadenfreude, look at our grand scholar Wen, who is recognized by the court as writing moral articles with moral principles. As a person in the situation, isn't he still as unmoved as a mountain? Tantanon grunted and added fuel to the fire, Assistant Minister Tang, you should learn a bit. This is called letting you cause trouble in the officialdom, I'll meditate as an old monk. Tang Taizhuang, who had been unhappy, also laughed with the two old men after hearing their banter. His anger immediately dissipated and he felt like he was trying to find joy in the midst of bitterness. Tang Taizhuang had mixed feelings. He remembered that when he was about to leave the Duo Yen cavalry, General Gu had said with a half-true, half-fake smile that it was indeed not easy to be an official in Great Peace City, but it was not without meaning. If he had the chance, he should talk to those old men more. He should not think that it was flattery. If he could make them joke with him, he, Tang Taizhuang, had more or less entered the capital. Otherwise, even if he became the Minister of War, no matter how frightening the official patch on his chest was, he had not crossed that threshold. He would always be an outsider who could not raise his voice. While the assistant minister of the Ministry of War was daydreaming, one or two high officials near the Grand Scholar of Wuxia Palace exchanged glances. They seemed to be expressionless, but the corners of their mouths curved. As expected, Serwin had started to meditate. At this time, a fat man who had hurriedly jumped off the rented carriage was completely dumbfounded. Had the carriage driver brought him to the wrong place? Why are there so many young women here? Have all the brothels in the capital opened in Yudao's area? The fat man who had almost ripped his court robes gave himself a slap in the face. It hurt so much that it was not a dream. The fat man shook his head hard and finally woke up a bit. But when he smelled the fragrance that came to his nose, his head started to feel dizzy again. He used all his strength to jump a few times. He was very glad that he could see the civil and military officials on the other side through this thick wall of rouge. A woman with a graceful bearing seemed to be dissatisfied that the fat man was blocking her view and said angrily, "Move." The fat man with a mild temperament moved a few steps to the side without another word. In the end, he was reprimanded by several women in unison, "Move." The fat man felt wronged. Just as he was about to move in fear, he was reprimanded by another woman. "Don't move, damn fat man, stay where you are. Her father is only a fourth-rank official, don't mind her." The woman opposite the fat man turned her head and said with a cold smile, "So what if my father is a fourth-rank official? He's the minister of censorate. He can impeach all officials. Your father is just a lousy assistant minister, is he really that amazing? Later, I'll have my father report your father." "What do you mean by your father, my father, and what minister of censorate and what minister of censorate and what minister of censorate? He was just a fifth-rank official with no power in the Imperial College." When the fat man heard this, his cheeks trembled. "My mother, sigh, it doesn't matter if he's the minister of censorate or not. A fourth-rank official really isn't that small as a sesame seed. Even a fart from him can kill me, Wang Tonglu." Wang Tonglu wanted to cry but had no tears. "The Imperial Road under my feet is very wide, but it can't compete with you ladies who are already standing on the street. If I delay the court session, I, a small person who almost got beaten to the ground by a fifth-rank official, Heavenly Strategy Chancellor, will really have to pack my things and get kicked out of the Imperial College." Wang Tonglu, who was just about to brace himself and pass through the wall of people, was immediately pointed at his nose by the woman in front of him. He was so scared that he took a few steps back. This time, Wang Tonglu even had the heart to hang himself with a strand of hair. Suddenly, screams resounded through the sky. Wang Tonglu was dumbstruck. He looked at the women in front of him who were either clutching their chests, covering their faces, or grabbing their hair in madness. How come they had gone crazy earlier than him? "The one who has a hard life is me, not you." Wang Tonglu sat down on the ground and pounded his hands on the ground. He muttered, "It's over, it's over. This time, even the old man won't be able to protect me. But I still haven't been able to buy a small house the size of a fingernail in Great Peace City. I still haven't saved enough money for a wife. My 200 caddies of autumn fat is natural, it really isn't from eating." There was a clatter. Wang Tonglu raised his head and saw the great aunt whose father was said to be the minister of censorate in front of him. Her eyes rolled back and she fell backwards. There was no one to support her. Behind her, there were two women of the same age who were tightly hugging each other and sobbing silently. Wang Tonglu thought very carefully and seriously. How about he also fainted and ended everything? Just as Wang Tonglu was weighing the pros and cons, a hand suddenly supported him and pulled him up. Wang Tonglu, who seemed to be riding the clouds, turned his head in confusion. That was a handsome face that he dreamed of every day when he looked in the mirror. It was smiling, the kind that was very good at tricking women. It was the kind that could rely on his face to beat half of the world. That person said with a smile, "Mr. Chancellor, what a coincidence. To be able to meet you at morning court twice, it is fate. Wang Tonglu was still confused, and... What did you say? That face was filled with a warm smile. Last time, wasn't it you who reminded this king to be more careful and not overstep the rules of etiquette? The censors of the censorate and the 6 departments, as well as the eunuchs of the ceremony directorate will all be watching. Wang Tonglu, who had seen a ghost in broad daylight, took several steps back in fright. It's you. When it rains, it pours. He really couldn't live like this. Last time, when the vassal kings gathered for the morning court session, it was because he acted like a good person and accompanied this young man to the gate. It was only a distance of 200 to 300 steps, and then he became a street rat that everyone in the Imperial College wanted to beat up. If it wasn't for the old man Tantanon who helped to say a few words of justice in front of the left chancellor at that time, Wang Tonglu's 200 pounds of autumn fat would have been reduced to 100 pounds. Chapter 1652. Wang Tonglu sat on the ground and suddenly burst into tears. Your Highness, I beg you, please be magnanimous, just think of me as a stuffy fart and leave with your noble feet. Without your Highness in the court meeting, it can't be regarded as a bright light to my humble dwelling. Please spare me. I really can't stand the torment. The sages in the books have warned us that if you are condemned by thousands of people, you will die without any illness. It's true. A young man wearing a purple and gold robe stood in front of the fat man and smiled. Mr. Chancellor, do you still have the strength of a scholar? Wang Tonglu cried heartbreakingly and choked with sobs. Your Highness, I want to have one, but I have dozens of family members, I have to support my family. Nearby, a woman whose family elder happened to hold a noble position in the Imperial College spoke even more deadly than the Immortal's flying sword. Aren't you the pitiful worm nicknamed Wang Luzi from the Imperial College? My uncle seemed to have mentioned you before, fatty. He said that you were delusional and that you saved some money with great difficulty in your early years to redeem a woman from a brothel. In the end, she ran away with a young scholar. You don't have a wife and children, do you? My uncle also said that your life is full of hardships, you are a cold stove that can't be burned no matter how much firewood you have. Wang Tonglu suddenly stopped crying and became quiet, silently sad. As Wang Tonglu wisely stopped making noise, perhaps there was such an excellent contrast of a bloated green leaf, which made the handsome and young Northwest vassal king look more like a banished immortal than a banished immortal. One of the braver girls took a step forward. Her cheeks were flushed red, and her hands were twisting the corners of her clothes. She bit her lips and finally gathered her courage to say, Your Highness, I am Song Yulin. You as in sweet rain, Lin as in verdant and lush. In fact, none of the young girls around her laughed at her slip of the tongue, because no one was listening to her. However, when she realized how stupid she was, tears already welled up in her eyes, and she couldn't say another word. Then everyone looked at the young vassal king, who they had only heard about 100 times, and laughed softly. Song Yulin, you as in lush, Lin as in sweet rain and dew. Song Yulin, nice to meet you. I'm Su Fingyan. This action of the young Wang caused an unprecedented uproar. This time, no matter how reserved the woman was, she was about to go crazy. The girl named Song Yulin was swaying as she took a few shaky steps forward. When she reached out her hand, she had already closed her eyes. Su Fingyan didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He hesitated for a moment, then stretched out his arm to let her hold his wrist. He joked, men and women shouldn't touch each other. In the future, if Miss Song can't get married because of this, you might as well come to Bailiang. I'll introduce you to Bailiang's great men. They kill the Baimang barbarians ruthlessly, but they treat the women they like well for the rest of their lives. After the commotion, there was a strange silence. Song Yulin, who was only 16, finally opened her eyes. She sobbed and said innocently, but I only want to marry you. Su Fingyan gently pulled back his arm but rubbed her head. Actually, when you grow up, you will naturally marry a scholar. At that time, the world will be peaceful, and you will have a truly peaceful life with him. Of course, don't forget, at that time, our Bailiang will also have scholars. Everyone present could not imagine at this time that when it was no longer the auspicious era, the world would be very peaceful. It was so peaceful that going from Great Peace City to Bailiang's Qingsang City, and even to Beimang's southern dynasty, there would be no obstructions. There was a woman called Song Yulin who really did find a scholar in Bailiang. That scholar did not pass the imperial exam, and in the end, he was just a poor private tutor. But the husband and wife treated each other with respect, from the bride to the groom, to the old hares to the old hares. On this morning in Great Peace City, when the young vassal king half-dragged the tragic fatty through the crowd, there were still many women who had not recovered. As though he had accepted his fate, Wang Tonglu's head drooped and he did not speak. Su Fengnian released his hand. All right, I'll go first. Just follow me from a distance. Wang Tonglu looked at the sharp gazes not far away and shook his head dispiritedly. He said, "It's no use. Those officials have good eyes. They may not be good at reading, but they are good at picking mistakes." Su Fengnian said with a smile, "It's not that there's no way. If I kick you away, you won't even have to go to court. You will also have a good reputation that fell from the sky. How about it? Mr. Chancellor, don't worry, I will use my strength. You have a lot of autumn fat, at most it will only hurt for half a day, but it will definitely not hurt your muscles and bones." Wang Tonglu grinned. "Wang Yi, forget it. Back then, I walked through the gates of hell. At most, I will be the heavenly strategy chancellor for the rest of my life. Anyways, the salary is enough to support myself, anyways, that girl is married." Su Fengnian glanced at him and asked, "Back then, you gave all your wealth to her to buy her freedom. In the end, it was all for someone else. Do you regret it?" Wang Tonglu sighed, and then looked indifferently at the dragon's pool and tiger's den in front of him. He said, "Of course I regret it. I'm not a saint, but I don't regret it that much. For the woman I like, knowing that she's living a happy life is a blessing in disguise. It's just like how I've won 2 imperial examinations in a row, but I almost failed to pass the Jinsha exam. In the end, I succeeded in entering the Imperial College. I don't need to spend money to read books for the rest of my life. It's the same principle." The old man. "Yes, Tantanon. He said that a living person can't die from holding back his urine. This kind of words can't be read in books, but I remember it in my heart." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Well, you are indeed the Mr. Chancellor that Tantanon said is a pound of meat and a pound of knowledge. You are more magnanimous than the average person." Wang Tonglu blurted out, "Do you think I want to be so magnanimous?" The fat man trembled and quickly shrank his neck. The two people with great disparity in status once again walked together on this imperial road. The fat man turned his head and looked at the women who were still unwilling to leave. He sighed and said, "Wang Yi, it's like a dream. This is the first time I have experienced this kind of battle in my life. I will definitely not encounter it in the future." The fat man muttered in his heart, "I hope I won't encounter it again." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "I am about the same. This kind of thing is not much easier than facing the tens of thousands of Beimang's iron cavalry." The fat man said with a face of disbelief, "How is that possible?" Su Fengnian said, "You don't believe me. I used to spend a lot of money when I went to the brothel, and I spent more than the average person. Looking back, it was all a waste of money. But I also became thick-skinned at that time. Later on, I heard more of your Li Yang's scolding and became more used to it." "Right, after the last court meeting, did you scold me?" The honest and simple Wang Tonglu subconsciously said, "Scolding must be in private." Wang Tonglu suddenly said resolutely, "No, absolutely not." Su Fingnian teased, "Oh, you know how to sail according to the wind." Wang Tonglu whispered, "My little skills are useless against those slippery old foxes." As the two slowly walked forward, Wang Tonglu could already vaguely recognize the identity of the official at the front. Su Fingnian said softly, "You really don't want to trick me?" Wang Tonglu was in a dilemma. His legs were getting heavier and heavier. Chapter 1653. Just when Su Fingnian couldn't bear to help him make the decision, the young official of the Imperial College clenched his fists. "It's too late, I'll be tough today. I've been a coward for nearly 10 years, 10 years, I've been so cowardly that I can't even study in peace. At worst, I'll just quit being an official. I'll pack my things and go home." Su Fingnian asked, "Lousy?" Wang Tonglu quickly said, "This official." Su Fingnian was amused and playfully said, "Whether you believe it or not, this time is different from last time. You will only be promoted and get rich, you won't lose your official hat." Wang Tonglu honestly said, "Don't, Prince, don't say that. It's fine if you don't say it, but when you say that I have something to look forward to, my teeth are chattering." When Su Fingnian got closer and closer to the gate, the officials imperceptibly began to retreat. Wang Tonglu muttered to himself, "Last time I walked in the clouds, I didn't experience the feeling of a fox borrowing the tiger's power. Today I'm going to die anyway." Wang Tonglu, straighten your back. This is the first time in your life, if you don't cherish it, you will be struck by lightning. Then Wang Tonglu heard the vassal king that he couldn't hate from the bottom of his heart say a few words. Wang Tonglu was about to say a few words to him to boost his courage, and then, there was no one around him. Wang Tonglu immediately returned to his original state, subconsciously turning around and then running away. He didn't care about any other consequences. At this time, an old man shouted, "Wang Tonglu." As if he was cast by an immortal, when he heard the voice, the fat man stopped and turned his neck to see the old man quickly walking over. The old man kicked the guy and laughed angrily, "Chancellor Wang, oh Chancellor Wang, have you forgotten the pain after the scar healed? Previously you recklessly walked side by side with the vassal king once, are you addicted to walking?" Wang Tonglu tried to stretch out his hand to wipe his tears and pretend to be pitiful, but unfortunately, he found that there were no tears, so he could only laugh dryly. "Old man, it's really not that this official wanted to get close, but when this official got off the car, the young ladies were blocked outside and couldn't come in, and then the prince was pulled in." Tantanon narrowed his eyes and snorted, "Oh. Why don't you play dead?" Wang Tonglu scratched his head and said, "I was so busy sweating that I didn't think of this. Then, I came here in the blink of an eye. Later, I thought about it and decided to just let other people do whatever they want." Wang Tonglu wanted to cry but had no tears. "Old master," he said, "why don't you help the Buddha all the way to the west and save this official one more time?" Tantanon sneered and said, "It's hard to say whether you are a Buddha or not, but if you want to go to the Western Paradise, you don't need anyone to send you off." Wang Tonglu helplessly awaited death. Tantanwang said angrily, "All right, follow me." Fatty smiled from ear to ear. The old man asked softly, "What did that Sioux kid say to you?" Fatty smiled foolishly and said, "I was so scared that I forgot all about it. I can't remember at the moment. When old master brings this official in, I will definitely think about it during the court meeting. I will report it to old master when I return." Tantanon looked at him in a new light and said, "You are enlightened." Fatty was resentful. Suddenly, he had a flash of inspiration and said in a low voice, "Old master, I remember something." In the end, that prince seemed to have said something before he left. When old Prince Liang walked the imperial road for the first time, no one was willing to go with him. Prince Liang didn't count the first time, but the second time, if there was someone who was not afraid of death following him, then he would be too lazy to say something like, not kneeling in the court, carrying a sword into the palace. Tantanon's eyes shone and he laughed loudly. He pulled Wang Tonglu's hand and walked quickly to Qi Yanglong's side. Then, Tantanon whispered a few words to the head of the secretariat. His expression was strange, as if he couldn't win against Wang Tonglu, but someone could suppress him. Wang Tonglu saw the unreachable Grand Secretary of the dynasty staring at him and laughed. He patted his shoulder and said, "Wang Tonglu, Grand Chancellor Wang, right? You are good." Wang Tonglu's shoulder tilted and he swallowed his saliva. With a pale face, he said, "Little Chancellor, I am Little Chancellor, a very little Chancellor." Qi Yanglong smiled and said, "I heard that the guy with the surname Su didn't even bother to participate in the court assembly because of you." Wang Tonglu's eyes turned rapidly and he patted his chest loudly, "Absolutely not. I am so damn quick-witted, so quick-witted." Wang Tonglu admired himself a little. If he angered old Master Tantanon, he would at most be scolded and kicked a few times. But if he angered this former Grand Chancellor Qi, not to mention 200 caddies of meat, even if he had 2,000 caddies of autumn fat, it wouldn't be enough to shave him. Tantanon was stunned at first, then he stomped his feet and scolded, "Damn you Wang Tonglu. Ungrateful brat who can't be tamed. Get the hell out of my province today, see if I can't take care of you." Wang Tonglu opened his mouth wide. Qi Yanglong smiled amiably and patted the young fatty's shoulder lightly. "Don't listen to Tantanon's nonsense, it's useless even if he has a loud voice. In the small court assembly, I will personally greet His Majesty and ask you to come to my secretariat. It's not a high position, but it's still standard 4th rank. As for whether you can climb up, it will depend on your own ability." The fatty looked left and right, then lowered his head and said softly, "Lord Head of the Secretariat, after thinking about it carefully, I still think it's better to go to the Secretariat." The fatty who had his head lowered didn't see the two elders looking at each other and smiling knowingly, nodding their heads secretly. Huanwen kicked the fatty again. "Get the hell back to your colleagues in the Imperial College, don't be an eyesore here." With Wang Tonglu's size, when he jogged, it was really no different from getting the hell out of here. Huanwen turned to look at the door. "Mr. Qi, after the Guangling Road War is over, I will resign and return to my hometown. In the future," Qi Yanglong interrupted Tantanon's words and said in a low voice, "It's okay, I will try my best to hold on for a few more years." Huanwen suddenly said sadly, "Green eyes, oh green eyes, you still lost." Qi Yanglong shook his head. "Huanwen, you are wrong. It seems that one person lost and the world won, but in fact, the world lost and one person won. I believe that in the hundreds and thousands of years later, many people have flipped through the pages of books about us, but it's fine if they have. Only Zhang Julu, this green eyes, will make people slowly flip through those pages in the dead of night and carefully read them a few times, and maybe they will even say regretfully, 'Why is there no wine to drink at the table?'" Huanwen murmured, "It would be even better if there was a plate of peanuts at hand." Many years later, at the end of the winter when firecrackers were used to celebrate the old year, Tantanon on his sickbed, no one would be able to hear his last words. "Old friend, do you have wine? Do you have peanuts?" In the second year after Huanwen's death, the new emperor of Liang rehabilitated Zhang Julu, the first person in Yonghui's reign, and posthumously conferred the title of Duke of Anghua. There was a gentlewoman, who was not very beautiful, with her child, who could already recite many Confucian classics, looking at the row of tombs and asking her son to kowtow to them one by one. In the end, the mother and son sat side by side in front of a tombstone engraved with the name Zhang Bianguan. The child, as in previous years, read loudly for his father, his grandfather, the mother and son, and the other Zhang family except for a woman. Further away, the emperor and empress of Liang stood without any retinue, but they did not dare to disturb them. There was an old man who lived in seclusion in the countryside. In the snowy twilight, he walked unsteadily. He did not go to the Anghua cemetery where only the mother and son were there to sweep the tombs, but there was no shortage of wine, but to a small tomb that was far from being extremely glorious. In front of the tombstone, He poured a glass of wine and put a plate of peanuts. Just after the old man left, there was another provincial official who resolutely resigned from his position. For the old man that he often talked about, he poured more wine and peanuts. He sat alone in the wind and snow all night. Perhaps some people, even when they were on the verge of death, had never left in such a carefree manner. But in the end, these scholars of Liang were still worthy of Liang. Chapter 1654. There is an event at 8 p.m. on the Shuzhongtiba. You are welcome to ask questions. It is time to start spoilers. Qi Yanglong really did go to the Demoyai post house, personally urging the young king to leave the capital with his troops. However, as soon as the elder got off the carriage, the post house officer ran up to him with a small cloth bag in his hands. Because he didn't dare confirm the elder's identity, he carefully asked, "May I ask if elder is from the secretariat?" The post house officer didn't directly ask if it was the head of the secretariat, instead bringing up the yamen instead of his official position. Even if he made a mistake, he could still make up for it. The elder nodded and made an end sound. He asked, "Could it be that the king of Beiliang has already left the capital?" The post house officer's knees went weak. Fortunately, the elder had already grabbed the cloth bag and weighed it in his hand. He said in confusion, "Seal." The post house officer, who had almost knelt on the ground, forcibly straightened his back. He didn't know what to do and his face flushed red. The Demoyai post house had always been a place of plague that ordinary officials avoided like the plague. Last year, he had also accidentally angered a manager of the department for purging officials in the Ministry of War, which was why he was thrown here to fend for himself. How could he have thought that there would be a day when he would speak face to face with the head of the secretariat? When the post house officer heard the prince say that Qi Yanglong of the secretariat would be coming to Demoyai this morning, he didn't take it seriously. He felt that at most, a third or fourth rank official would be enough for his ancestors to come. The post house officer gritted his teeth. He didn't have the time to worry about being rude. His mind was filled with the thought that every extra word he said to Grand Secretary Qi would add a bit more glory to his family. He asked in a trembling voice, "Head of the secretariat, do you want to enter the post house to rest for a bit?" Qi Yanglong smiled. Just as he was about to tactfully refuse, he suddenly thought of something and asked, "Does Demoyai have green ant wine this time?" The post house officer said like a chicken pecking at rice, "Yes, yes, yes." When the post house officer led the head of the secretariat into the inner courtyard of the post house, he purposely made the many minor officials of the post house busy. Qi Yanglong didn't expose his shallow intentions, allowing the post house officer to lead the way into that secluded small courtyard. The post house officer quickly brought out a rattan chair for the old man and explained that Wang Yi liked to rest on the rattan chair whenever he had nothing to do. He had heard from the previous post house officer that Wang Yi did the same when he came to the capital last time. He had a special liking for this rattan chair. Qi Yanglong lay on the rattan chair and looked like he was resting with his eyes closed. The post house officer took 2 pots of wine from his subordinate and did not dare to disturb him. He stood under the eaves with his back bent and waited quietly. Qi Yanglong rested for about half an hour. After opening his eyes, he asked softly, "What did the young prince say when he gave you the item?" The post house officer slapped his head and quickly said, "I almost forgot. His Highness had indeed warned me that if the head of the Hall of Secretaries graced us with his presence, I should tell him that this little plaything was temporarily lent to him by a scholar surnamed Zhang. Now, it is returning it to the scholars of the world. If it weren't for the head of the Secretariat, since Milord has personally dismounted, then there is no need to say anything." Qi Yanglong was taken aback. A scholar with the surname Zhang. Green eyes? Definitely not. Zhang Julu would definitely not have any personal relationship with Beiliang. Even if he did leave behind this relic, it should have been given to Huanwen. Oh, then it should be the saint of the Zhang family, Yanqing Gong. Qi Yanglong slowly stood up and put away the small cloth bag. He took the 2 pots of green ant wine from the posthouse officer and asked with a smile, "Have you drunk this wine?" The posthouse officer blushed with shame and said, "I only drank a few mouthfuls yesterday. It's a bit hard to swallow. It's too strong, like it's burning my throat." The posthouse officer paused and flattered, "Head of the Hall of Secretaries, even if you want to drink, you should drink it slowly." Qi Yanglong dismissed it with a smile and took the wine and left. "Give silver." The old man did not have this thought. If he really gave silver, how would this unknown official dare to brag to his colleagues about his title as head of the Hall of Secretaries? How would he be able to use this title to seek a future with a clear conscience? Great Peace City, Great Peace City. It was a very peaceful city, but there were not many people who were truly at ease here. In today's court assembly, the young king who came to the door but turned back finally did not appear again. This greatly disappointed the Rouge army that was even more powerful than yesterday. The Assistant Minister of Rights, Jean Lanting, had not attended the morning court assembly for 2 consecutive days. He had asked for leave from the old Minister of Rights, Sima Puhua. He did not even go to the court assembly for the next few days. He closed the door and refused to see any guests. It was said that he did not even receive people like Gao Tingshu and Wu Zongxian. After the Assistant Minister of Personnel, Wen Taiyi, and Anong General, Ma Zhongxian, became the Jing'an County Administrator and Deputy Regional Governor respectively, the head of the Ping family quickly took over as the left Assistant Minister of Personnel. The Imperial Army's high-ranking general, Li Chang'an, replaced Ma Zhongxian as the new Anong General. Just as the morning court assembly in the capital was bustling with activity, 800 light cavalry under the careful escort of the Jingji West camp were already on their way to Jidong's border. Everyone in the Jingji West cavalry saw that there wasn't going to be any trouble and felt a sense of relief. It was said that it was easier to invite the devil than to send it away. This northwest vassal king and his 800 white horses were truly difficult to invite and send away. It was said that the northern general, Ma Lulang, had been scared to death. One of his troops had also suffered a great calamity the day before yesterday. The blood stains on the street outside the Imperial Astronomer's Gate had not been wiped off yet. The private army that the Minister of War, Wu Zhongshuan, brought to the Jingji South camp had also suffered a great loss for no reason. The cause seemed to be a conflict with the young king at the Ministry of War's Yamen. A valiant general from the southern border was beaten half to death on the spot. The Anxi general, Zhao Gui, who was born in a noble family, seemed to be seriously ill. It was difficult for him to even get out of bed, let alone wear armor and ride a horse. Therefore, only Qi Changgong, the captain of the Western Cavalry, was left as the backbone of the Western Cavalry. After about 100 miles from the Jingji West camp, several of the Bailiang cavalry turned their horses around and stopped. When the Western Cavalry, who only dared to follow far behind the 800 Bailiang cavalry, saw this, Yuqi Changgong personally rode out and took the lead to approach. When he saw the figure of the king of Bailiang, he was immediately on tenterhooks and slowly moved forward. Su Fingnian, who was dressed in simple casual clothes with a white jade belt around his waist, lightly squeezed his horse's belly and came to Yuqi Changgong's side alone. After a moment of silence, he looked at the scene of the Liyang cavalry galloping forward and said, "Captain Yuqi, I apologize for troubling you when I went to the capital earlier." Yuqi Changgong was stunned, and his heart tightened. What? Was he going to use peaceful means before resorting to force? For a moment, this Hu cavalry captain didn't dare to speak. He was afraid that if he angered this arrogant and despotic demon of the Su family, he would implicate his 2 camps of cavalry. Su Fingnian smiled and said, "If we go further west, I estimate that we will soon be greeted by the Ji province soldiers. You can escort us here." Yuqi Changgong braced himself and said, "Your Highness, it's not that this general is unwilling to accept your kindness, but there are orders from above that the Jingji West camp must escort your Highness to the border of Ji province." Su Fingnian smiled and asked, "Is it Wu Zhongshuan or Tang Taizhuang?" Yuqi Changgong's expression was awkward. At this moment, a lone rider galloped over from the northeast. Su Fengnian sighed and slowly moved forward to meet this uninvited guest. The two riders faced each other 20-some paces apart. The man in front of Su Fengnian was slightly older than him. He did not have the playboy air of Anqi General Zhao Gui, nor did he have the martial aura of Yuqi Chonggong. If he had not appeared here, he would be an ordinary scholar on the streets of Great Peace City. The man raised his butt and rubbed it a few times. His voice was hoarse as he said, "I didn't dare to believe that it was really you. After I returned to the capital, I heard that a young swordsman had appeared in Great Peace City who had challenged Qi Jiaojie. His name was Wen Hua, but I didn't believe it either. Then, was it really that fellow I saw back then?" Su Fengnian nodded. "It was him. But, he no longer practices the sword." The man's expression was bitter. "Then back in Wuzhou, did you already know my identity?" Su Fengnian said helplessly, "After getting drunk several times, you told Wen Hua yourself that you were the grandson of the great general of this dynasty. I'm not deaf." Wen Hua naturally did not believe you. Just like how he thought I was boasting at the beginning, when I returned to Mount Qingliang, I knew who you, Ma Wenho, were. The number of generals in the Liyang dynasty with the surname Xingping Town can be counted on one hand, and there is only one surnamed Ma. The man softly murmured, "At that time, I couldn't afford to buy good wine. When I drank bad wine, it was easy to get drunk. What could I do?" Su Fengnian looked at this scholar that he had met by chance in Wuzhou back then with a complicated expression. At that time, Wu Wenho was a scholar who traveled tens of thousands of li alone. He liked to write travel books and happened to run into him and Wen Hua, who were playing chess and gambling in an alley. He lost all his money and then relied on them. After hanging out together for more than 2 months, Wen Hua and Wu Wenho seemed to be particularly at odds. Both sides didn't see eye to eye and would always get angry and glare at each other over trivial matters. Wen Hua never believed that this stingy and poor scholar came from a famous family, while Wu Wenho didn't believe that this ranger with a wooden sword could really make a name for himself in this life. However, at that time, Wu Wenho, who was away from home, didn't want to use his family's connections in the local area. He had always been shy of money. In addition, he was resentful that his master was a national chess player in Liyang. He couldn't win a single game of chess against the person surnamed Su. He stubbornly tangled with these two scoundrels for almost 3 months. Later, he had to cross Jiangnan and travel to the southern border. Only then did they finally part ways. Wu Wenho looked at Su Fengnian and asked bluntly, "If you don't know me, Wu Wenho, when you enter the capital this time, will you pay a visit to the manor of the great general of the north? Will you send punitive forces to denounce me?" Su Fengnian nodded and said, "Of course." Wu Wenho's expression was pained. Su Fengnian said indifferently, "In any case, the grudges of the older generation are right there. If you feel guilty toward your grandfather Ma Lulang and feel that the old debt hasn't been settled and that it is now my Su family that owes your Ma family, you can always ask me, Su Fengnian, to pay it back. Since you are the eldest legitimate grandson of the Ma family, I won't find it strange." Ma Wenho suddenly roared, "Could it be that you, the king of Beiliang, think I will act as if nothing happened?" Chapter 1655. Su Fengnian patted the Beiliang blade at his waist. His body leaned back slightly, his face full of sarcasm. "When you and I were poor, you, Ma Wenho, won a game of chess against me. Now, I, Su Fengnian, am one of the 4 grandmasters, and the king of Beiliang with 300,000 cavalry under my command. You want to wrestle with me? I reckon that even an assistant minister of one of the 6 ministries does not have the face to be arrogant with me. You, Ma Wenho, if you have the ability, you should be the head of the Secretariat or the Manxia province. Only then can you barely have the qualifications to be my opponent. Just like Bai Yan and my father, Su Shao. Speaking of which, Ma Wenho, do you need me, Su Fengnian, to wait for you for a few years, or a few decades. Ma Wenho's eyes were red. Su Fengnian smiled and asked, what, you are not convinced? 1,000 heavy cavalry of the Ma family is only a so-so. You are just a scholar, do you want to humiliate yourself? Su Fengnian turned his horse around, raised his hand and waved. This action was clearly full of sarcasm. Ma Wenho shouted, Su Fengnian, you are a bastard. Just you wait. Su Fengnian did not pay any attention to him, and left. In the distance, Yuchi Changgong, who had seen the unpleasant meeting between the two, heard these words. The Hu cavalry officer was even more worried for the eldest grandson of the Ma family. If the king of Beiliang wants to kill you, then he will kill you for nothing. The 2,000 cavalry under my command will at most help you collect your corpse. This vassal king had caused such a huge commotion in Great Peace City, but no one came out to uphold justice. Now that he had left the capital, the eldest grandson of the Ma family who had just lost his stabilizing force was nothing in front of him. Yuchi Changgong hesitated for a brief moment, but in the end, he gave up the idea of escorting Liang Qi into Ji County. With the eldest son of Ma family stirring up trouble, he, the commander of Hu cavalry, was really afraid that the king of Beiliang would use him as a punching bag to vent his anger. In the process of Yuchi Changgong running to get close to the young master of the Ma family, he just happened to pass by the young lord. The latter smiled and cupped his fist to bid farewell. Yuchi Changgong, who was flattered, hurriedly returned the greeting. After returning to the group, Jia Jia sat on his horse and looked at Su Fengnian with a puzzled expression. Su Fengnian picked up the mink hat from her head and put it on his own head. He laughed softly and said, only I am allowed to be Su Zhao's son, and Ma Wenho is not allowed to be Ma Lulang's grandson. There was no such logic in this world. As long as a person is alive, having something to think about is definitely better than not having anything to think about. Su Fengnian glanced at the lifted curtain of the carriage and saw half of the beautiful face. He joked, that's enough. You don't have to hide anymore. Even if you, Qin, get out of the carriage and ride away, no one will stop you. The white horse, or to be exact, the commander of the Phoenix Battalion, Yuan Meng, rode his horse over. This burly man, who had followed His Royal Highness to travel Jianghu, laughed and said, Your Highness, that group of capital cavalry is really cowardly. They are so boring. Su Fengnian glared at him and said, Don't be so sarcastic here. Do you think you are a hero just because you are a traitor? Yuan Meng's face was filled with hidden bitterness. Your Highness, I am reluctant to give up my position as the commander of the Phoenix Battalion. If Your Highness allows me to join the battle at the border as a commander, I will go straight to Huda City. Su Fengnian said grumpily, Right now, the Yuzhou cavalry lacks a general. Are you willing to give up your position as the commander of the Phoenix Battalion and become a fourth-rank cavalry general? Yuan Meng smiled mischievously and said, Damn it. I am not stupid. I will not do it. I will not do it even if you beat me to death. Even the cavalry generals in Yuzhou can't compare to the captains of our Liangzhou border army. Only a fool would go and lose face. Su Fengnian smiled and said, Commander Yuan, your words are quite firm. All right, when we pass by Yuzhou, this king will definitely have a good talk with Yan Wenluan, Qin Yinchui, Yu Wandao, and the others. It will also let the Yuzhou side know that Liangzhou has a hero like you, Yuan Meng. Yuan Meng smiled apologetically and said, Your Highness, it doesn't matter to Commander Yan and Deputy Commander Qin. After all, they are only the head of the infantry and can't control my official status. However, please don't say this to General Yu. If he becomes the deputy commander of our Beiliang cavalry in the future, what will I do? Su Fengnian laughed and scolded, Get out of here. Yuan Meng left with his tail between his legs. Next, Qin Yu indeed left the carriage. However, her horsemanship was mediocre. Afraid that she would delay the march, she rode on the same horse as Su Ying, who wore a red robe and a hat. Su Fengnian and Miss He rode side by side with them. Chen Yu asked curiously, "May I ask who that son of an aristocratic family is?" Su Fengnian sighed and said, "He is a friend I met during my earliest travels. At that time, apart from the two of them, this guy was the one I hit it off with the most. Of course, I had good karma with him, but I had bad karma with Xianyuan Qingfeng on the Great Snow Plateau. Actually, during those 3 years, I met a lot of people and a lot of things, but most of them were passed with a smile. For example, I once met a female hero who hadn't become famous yet. I think her surname was Qi, and she had a good temper. Her martial arts skills were ordinary, but her chest was really big. Every time she competed with others, she would be restrained because she felt embarrassed. She was the only female hero I met in those 3 years who didn't speak ill of us. It's a pity that there's no news about her in Liang Lake. Maybe she's married. That guy just now also fell for a fairy's skirt. As a result, there was one time when that fairy in white fought with another fairy. At that time, in our eyes, their fight was full of fairy aura. However, the fairy in his eyes had her underarm clothes cut by her opponent's long sword during the fight. After that, there was no more after that. Chen Yu was confused. Why is that? Su Fengnian narrowed his eyes and looked into the distance with a smile. Because we all saw that fairy's underarm hair. Chen Yu was dumbfounded and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Actually, there are a lot of interesting things. For example, there was a guy who went to a martial arts competition to find a spouse. The only time he won was because his opponent suddenly had a stomachache during the competition. Then, he had a rare moment of glory, so he chased after his opponent and beat him up. He grabbed his opponent's belt and refused to let go. In the end, you can probably imagine the scene. It was unbearable to look at." Another example, there was a young and handsome hero who was very admirable when he saw injustice on the road. He was also born with a dignified appearance, but the moment he opened his mouth to speak, he was done for. His speech was a complete mess, and no one knew where he came from. It was really a pity. It can be seen that it's really not easy to be a young hero who is loved by everyone outside the martial arts world, right? Chen Yu was speechless. Su Fengnian saw a horse appear on a hillside in the distance. He laughed and spurred the horse forward. Jia 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 and Suing also followed. Chen Yu looked at the back of the figure in front of her. She suddenly understood the change in the young man's state of mind. Jianghu was a place where it was difficult for people to die if they didn't want to. On the battlefield, people wanted to live but might not be able to. There was no difference between the two, but there was a difference of life and death. This man named Su Fengnian might not be purely into the Jianghu in green robes with swords. He might not really dislike the battlefield, right? Su Fengnian seemed to have guessed Chen Yu's thoughts. He suddenly turned his head and said with a smile, "The battlefield is actually the most magnificent Jianghu. Really, one day, I will have a good fight there. 10,000 enemies are 10,000 enemies. If in Jianghu, where can you find 10,000 people to be your green leaves?" Chen Yu finally had a good impression of him, but it suddenly disappeared. Su Fengnian turned his head and saw the horse. He shouted with a smile, "Ant." Then, in the distance behind the armored woman, 2 people suddenly appeared on horseback. Wu Qingqing Yu groom was holding a little girl in a green robe. Su Fengnian reined in his horse and stopped beside Aunt Zhao Yute. Yu groom rode closer and said with a smile, "If your highness doesn't mind, let me go with you." Su Fengnian frowned and said, "Lu Huang is not in Beiliang." Yu groom gently rubbed the little girl's head and said calmly, "It has nothing to do with Shidi. I just want to take a look outside the Northwest Pass." Chapter 1656. Su Fengnian was silent for a moment and then smiled. "It's good to take a look now. At this time, the Beimang barbarians still haven't caught their breath and the border is still peaceful. In the future, we might not be able to comfortably watch the desert wind. Yu Groom got straight to the point. No matter. If there really is a war, as long as Beiliang needs me, I can join the army. Su Fengnian asked curiously, you don't want to avenge your master? Are you not afraid that your apprentice brothers and sisters will hold a grudge? Yu Groom said calmly, they are two different things. Besides, we are not that narrow-minded. Speaking of which, when did my master, Wang Xianji, fall to the point where he needs his disappointing apprentices to avenge him? Su Fengnian smiled. That's true, that battle. Yu Groom's face was bitter as he hurriedly waved his hand. What happened in that battle is between you and my master. Winning or losing, life or death is also between the two of you, but if you say anything more, I'm afraid I won't be able to resist. Even if I know I will lose, I will still fight you. At that time, I will be embarrassed. I don't have the face to go to Beiliang, but if I don't go to Beiliang, this girl will make things difficult for me. Su Fengnian nodded. Zhao Yute looked gratifyingly at Su Fengnian. To be able to make a proud martial artist like Yu Groom yield, it was not just because of the title of King of Beiliang, or even because of the 300,000 cavalry. When they went up the slope, there were 3, and when they went down the slope, there were 5. Su Fengnian suddenly asked Yu Groom, I heard that you are more focused on practicing the sword than Lu Huang. Yu Groom nodded. Su Fengnian hesitated for a moment before asking, then have you ever thought of a question? Back then, when you were competing with others, your sword chi was unstoppable, and your spirit was boundless, and then the spectators clapped and cheered, good sword, good sword. Don't you feel awkward? It's a bit of a killjoy. Yu Groom was confused. What's awkward about it? If you feel bored, you can just ignore it. Moreover, if I were to spar with someone, it would most likely be a life and death battle. Naturally, I wouldn't care about what others think. Su Fengnian curled his lips and muttered, what kind of young swordsman is he if he becomes stupid from practicing the sword? Groom Yu smiled and asked, what do you mean? Su Fengnian smiled and was about to speak when Qin Yu interrupted, Mr. Yu, I advise you not to listen to his explanation. As expected, bridegroom Yu turned his head and put on an aloof posture as if he wanted to hang the topic up high and leave it hanging. Su Fengnian could only settle for the next best thing. He turned his head to face his mother's sword attendant. Unexpectedly, this aunt also smiled and shook her head. I don't want to hear it either. The young vassal king who ran into a wall everywhere felt a little depressed. Su Fengnian, who was bored to death, hummed a little song. It was a song that he had learned from a certain someone in the streets. Don't say that I'm so poor that my sleeves carry the wind. Let's not talk about the fact that I have no place to sleep when I am tired. The world is my bed. Let's not talk about the fact that I have no good wine when I am thirsty. The great river is the wine pot, there is no one as lucky as me in the world, no one as lucky as me. The green-robed child listened to the song and felt it was very funny. But when she looked around, why was no one laughing? In the winter of the second year of Xiangfu, after the vassal king who had caused a ruckus in Jing had left the capital and reached Beiliang's territory, it was said that the Princess Sui Zhu Zhao Fengya had died of an illness. This grievous news that was neither too big nor too small was quickly forgotten by everyone in the great news that was sent back to Great Peace City. Under the personal leadership of Gu Jiantang, the king of Jiaodong Zhao Sui, the crown prince Zhao Yi, and the king of Liao Zhao Xiong, the 3 royal relatives, worked together to assist Gu Jiantang. With the Duoyan elite cavalry and the Blackwater cavalry as the main force, a total of 160,000 cavalry, they went north to conquer the desert. This became the first great victory after Yong Hui's numerous failed expeditions in the beginning of Liang. They beheaded 80,000 Beimang barbarians. General Wang Sui, who had previously stayed in Beimang's western capital, quickly rushed to the front lines. Only then did they stop the collapse of the Eastern Front. He gave power to the two young generals, Chiao and Dong, and once again pushed the border forward to the old border between the two dynasties. The right assistant minister of the Ministry of War, Su Gong, who was originally only patrolling the border on behalf of the heavens, led 10,000 light cavalry and advanced 1,000 Li Ji Zhou General Yuan Tingshan, Deputy General Han Fang, and Yang Huchen sent out all of their elite troops to work with Gu Jiantang, who was responsible for restraining the main force of Beimang. They fought fiercely against the two flanks of Beimang, Shiwei, and Wang Jingchong for half a day. If not for Liao King Zhao Xiong's greed for merit and the defeat of Zhong Tan, who had been demoted to the Eastern Front as generals, the two Liao cavalry troops from Liang would have been able to enter the hinterland of Beimang. After Guangling Road's West Chu achieved a short-lived victory, the weakness of their scattered forces started to show. On the Eastern Front, Ko Jianghuai could not hold the fort alone. Although he had defeated Song Li and vassal King Zhao Yi's counterattack several times, the Western Front, under the reckless attacks of Wu Zhongshuan's 100,000 Nanjiang troops and numerous Central Plains troops, the defensive line was in danger. As the commander of the southern expedition, Lu Xingxiang, who was supposed to be in the middle of the command, also left his post and advanced prematurely. However, compared to Liao King Zhao Yi, he was much luckier. He was able to successfully rush to the back of the Eastern Front and settle the battle there. At the same time, Shu King Chen Jibao's 10,000 Shu soldiers mysteriously appeared in the north of the Eastern Front. They appeared near a portion of West Chu's reinforcements to the Western Front and finally defeated the young West Chu soldier Saint Xia. West Chu had no choice but to retreat on all fronts. Apart from Chao Changqing's navy that temporarily held the advantage, all of West Chu's previous achievements were returned to Liang. During this time, there were rumors that the king of Beiliang, Su Fengnian, was about to marry a woman from the Lu family as Beiliang's official consort. Liang was mostly speculating about which generals and officials would appear in the northern Liang prince's manor during the festivities on Mount Qingliang this time. The Liang court naturally hoped to know clearly which people were the true trusted aides of the new Prince Liang. What was even more important was that of the new generation of Beiliang nobles who had the qualifications to enter Qingliang Mountain. Were there more who were hostile towards the Liang Zhao family, or were there more who maintained a neutral stance? As for when the young king passed through Jizhou and entered Hezhou, Deputy General Han Fang and Yang Huchen led their troops to demonstrate. This became a story that the people of Jingdou loved to talk about. In comparison, King of Han Zhao Xiong, Administrator Han Lin, and Jadushi Kai Nan were silent. It was inevitable that people would criticize them. After the great general passed away, the Qingliang Mountain Prince's mansion, which didn't even have red couplets, finally had a celebratory atmosphere that hadn't been seen in a long time. Although they didn't hang up large red lanterns with great fanfare, the servants and maids in the mansion all smiled when they saw people. The head of the Lu family, Lu Dongjiang, who had become more and more distant from Qingliang Mountain, also took the initiative to visit the palace. He drank a lot with Song Dongming and Bai Yu. The group of Lu family members who had been sick in Liangzhou finally had their tails up again. When they met people, each of them held their heads high and their chests puffed out. And Wang Linquan, who had transformed from the richest man in Qingzhou to the god of wealth of Beiliang, who had been personally managing the increasingly busy business in Liuzhou, suddenly began to live in seclusion. Lu Qingyan was not dragged down by the Lu family and her relatives. In the end, she became the official consort of Beiliang, and not Wang Chudong, whose family had made great contributions to Beiliang. This was indeed something that surprised the entire Beiliang society. In the night, at the peak of Qingliang Mountain, below the White Crane Tower, Su Fengnian, Lu Qingyan, and Wang Chudong sat on a stone bench. Su Fengnian was using a leaf to play the Ballad of the Spring Goddess. Wang Chudong had placed a book on the stone table and was resting his head on it. Lu Qingyan sat beside him and her. Behind the three of them, Jia Jiajia and Suing were flying up and down the White Crane Tower. Halfway up the mountain, by the tide-listening lake, Xiao Yute and Su Weisheng were holding hands and talking about intimate things between women. On the platform of the tide-listening pavilion, Su Beiji and Qin Shiliang stood side by side. The two young strategists who were beginning to become famous all over the world didn't speak. As the night deepened, the crowd dispersed. Su Fengnian came alone to a simple, uninhabited hut. There seemed to be a delicate and weak girl standing there. She said to him fiercely, "I want to learn the sword from Li Chungang and stab you to death." Chapter 1657. When he was young, he thought that a village with more than 100 families was very big and that there were mountains and rivers. Later, when he was young, he went to the town and saw the market. Only then did he realize that the village was small. Later, he went to the county town with a wooden sword. Only then did he realize that a town with bridges and restaurants was not that big. Later, he saw famous mountains and rivers, met many people and many things. Only then did he realize how big the world was. But for some reason, in the end, he only wanted to go home. Then, he quietly left Jianghu from the biggest city in the world. He went all the way south and returned home. Because he was afraid of causing trouble for his brother and sister-in-law, the village was small. It seemed like adding a pair of chopsticks to a table was not an easy task. It meant that his brother had to plant more rice seedlings and burn more charcoal every year. His sister-in-law also had to do a lot of needlework, pick more mulberry leaves, and raise more silkworms. Moreover, his nephew also went to a private school. He also thought that as his uncle, he could at least earn some money to buy some paper and pen for his child. Therefore, the young man with a broken arm and a limp took advantage of his youth and strength to settle down in that small town. Perhaps fortune favors fools, he became a waiter in a small restaurant. Later, he even found a wife who could be considered outstanding in 100 miles radius. There was a flower in the town called the cow dung flower. It really grew the most luxuriant in the cow dung by the roadside. When he was wandering outside in his early years, when he heard people say that the flower was inserted in the cow dung for the first time, he could not help laughing. Now that he thought about it, he was even happier. It turned out that he was that pile of cow dung. That was pretty good. At the beginning of autumn this year, he finally successfully abducted his wife. It was not that there were no twists and turns on the father-in-law and mother-in-law's side, but they could not endure his wife's persistence and probably could not endure his shamelessness. They did not fight back when he was hit or scolded. In any case, he was shameless. Anyway, he was shameless. The two elders pinched their noses and nodded. His wife's two brothers actually looked down on him. There were a few times when they blocked him in an alley when he was helping the restaurant to pick up vegetables, fruits, and fish. They did not really hit him, but they did not cower. Of course, he did not have stage fright. Although he did not make a name for himself in the outside world, after all, he had seen the world. From the beginning to the end, he clung to his stance and did not relax. He only smiled at them. After a few times, the two brothers-in-law were tormented until they lost their temper. Although they did not look good on the day of their sister's wedding, in the end, they did not stop him. They just treated him as a married woman spilled water. Otherwise, how could they really beat this guy until his nose was black and his face was swollen? Although their sister had a gentle personality and had always been amenable to discussion, sometimes when she was stubborn, she was even more unyielding than a young and vigorous man. They really could not change her mind. During the Mid-Autumn Festival this year, she wanted to go back to the village to spend it with her brother and sister-in-law. This was in accordance with the rules. However, he wanted to go to her mother's house to celebrate the reunion festival this year. He had already told his brother and sister-in-law that at most, they could spend the Mid-Autumn Festival together next year. They also agreed with him and felt that she had been wronged by marrying into the Wen family. She still wanted to say something, but he waved his arm heroically and said, "You have to listen to me, the head of the family, on this matter. The corners of her mouth curled up as she smiled and nodded. However, when the young couple brought a box of mooncakes to the door, they were stopped by his brother-in-law. He said that his sister could enter the family, but he could forget about it if his surname was Wen. As he spoke, the boorish man became angry. He took the box of mooncakes that the waiter had spent 2 taels of silver to buy and fiercely smashed it against the wall of the alley opposite the door, telling the man with the surname Wen to quickly scram. His wife was angry at that time and did not say a word to her brother. She grabbed her husband's arm and turned to leave. However, he stood there and was unwilling to leave. He smiled and said that his wife must go home to see her parents today. Otherwise, he would not leave. Looking at his unusually serious expression, she did not cry out loud, but her eyes turned red. He softly told her that in this world, a family was a family. It was a matter of life and there was no threshold that could not be crossed. She hummed in agreement and lowered her head to push her brother's shoulder away. She quickly walked into the courtyard. Not long after, she walked back to the main door and suddenly saw her brother squatting side by side with the box of mooncakes beside her brother's feet. When he saw his sister, the dark-skinned man seemed to blush. He stood up with the box of mooncakes, as if he wanted to say a few harsh words to not embarrass himself. After hesitating for a long time, he still could not say anything. He could only fiercely say to his brother-in-law, "If I hear that you dare to bully my sister in the future, I will break your 3rd leg." Chapter 1658. That day, on the way home under the moonlight, they slowly stepped on the bluestone path. Occasionally, she would playfully dance with her hands behind her back and then turn around to smile at him. At that time, he only had a very simple thought, which was to earn more money so that she could live a good life as soon as possible. He didn't want such a good woman to roll her eyes with him. Then, he began to calculate how much money he had saved and when he could rent a bigger house, change it to a small courtyard, and finally change it to a big house. But as he thought about it, he couldn't help but sigh. It wasn't that he was tired, but he felt that if he wanted to live a down-to-earth life, every copper coin had to be stained with sweat. Fortunately, his legs weren't nimble, but he was diligent, willing to put in effort, willing to smile, and willing to get up early and work in the dark. After the early days when he was often treated as a joke and entertainment, the men who had a sword around the town and considered themselves as young heroes were not too willing to compete with a young waiter like him. In their words, it was meaningless to step on dog shit. Other than dirty shoes, it was useless. It was degrading to bully a waiter who couldn't make a sound after a few blows. Moreover, as he often called storytellers to the restaurant to tell stories about Jianghu, even if they often told cliched stories, the small town showed its benefits. It was better to have stories to listen to when drinking tea than no stories at all, wasn't it? Moreover, whenever other storytellers competed with each other in the small restaurant, there would always be a few new tricks. The restaurant's business was generally getting better and better. That shopkeeper, no matter how much he nagged, was actually not a bad person. Otherwise, he wouldn't have taken him in. As business gradually improved, he gave him a few more taels of silver every month. Occasionally, when the restaurant was closed, the shopkeeper would drink by himself and accidentally drink too much wine. He would even drag him, a waiter, to eat a few meat dishes with enough oil and water. When he got married, the shopkeeper even gave him a red packet of 3 taels of silver. It was considered a very generous gift in the small town. After that, he worked harder and harder. It was not an exaggeration to say that he could replace 3 waiters, but it was certainly not an exaggeration to say that he could replace 2 waiters. After this year's Mid-Autumn Festival, the shopkeeper gritted his teeth. He felt that no matter how easy the waiter was to order around, he would not be able to cope with the increasingly flourishing business. Therefore, he hired a delicate young lady from a neighboring village to be the wine seller. She was 17 or 18 years old and had good potential. It was just that her family was too poor and she appeared thin and tanned. After she started working in the restaurant, she had been stained with meat, fish, and oil several times, and her figure immediately became slim. Very soon, she gained a bit of a fresh and lively appearance. As a result, the restaurant's daily income increased again. This made the shopkeeper extremely happy. Especially with his discerning eyes, he could see that the young lady was a bit interested in the young man with the surname Wen. He was both angry and amused. He thought that his daughter was really obsessed with him. Even if the waiter's temperament was not bad, he still had a family. Why did she blindly bump into him like a moth bumping into a lamp? In the future, it would not be difficult to find a young man of equal social status. Could it be that she would have to become the one man's concubine? That was a blessing that only those rich old men in town could enjoy. However, what was even more interesting was that the young man with the surname Wen was usually quite smart. If it were any other ordinary man, it would be reasonable for him to touch the little girl's hand or pinch her waist when she took the initiative to throw herself into his arms. It was a small matter after all, it did not cost him a single cent. But the man surnamed Wen was still not enlightened. He was even more serious than the few scholars in the town who had achieved scholarly honors. This made the shopkeeper, who was watching the fun with a smile on his face, anxious for him. It was going to be winter soon. The rich old men were probably counting their fingers and waiting for the day of snow. They had prepared enough charcoal at home and were eagerly waiting to wear those mink furs bought from the county town. But it was much more difficult for the poor. It was cold when it snowed and even colder when the snow melted. Buying new clothes and thick boots cost money. Using charcoal to light the stove also burned money. It was said that in the north, especially after the Guangling River that divided the Liang dynasty into the north and the south, many people died. The war was very fierce. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers from the imperial court were fighting there. There were even some well-informed town officials who came from the county town, saying that in the south, there was a great general under the command of a great lord. He led an army of 100,000 from the southernmost side to the Guangling River and killed until blood flowed like a river. It was said that the dead almost blocked the entire river. They also vaguely heard that the place called Beiliang in the northwest of Liang suffered even more. The army of 1 million Beimang barbarians had arrived at their doorstep. Some of the older people in the town could not help sighing when talking about these important imperial matters. Many of the younger people were heartless and would talk back to the old people from time to time. Most of them thought that the war was not a big deal and that if they joined the army, they might be destined to be a general. When they came back from the battlefield, they would lead hundreds of armored soldiers and sit high on their horses. That was what they called awe-inspiring. It had already been 4 or 5 days since the storyteller showed up in the restaurant. Not only were the regular customers unable to hold themselves back, some of the more impatient ones even stepped on the bench and cursed. Even the innkeeper was so anxious that he grabbed the waiter surnamed Wen and gave him a good scolding. The waiter smiled and explained that the storyteller had gone to the county town to learn from the old storyteller. Now, not only were there old storytellers in the few larger restaurants in town, even young and beautiful women were playing the pipa to liven things up. If they wanted to attract more business, they had to show some of their real skills. The innkeeper rolled his eyes. That was the logic, but you should at least let that old man come back and show us a few things. If you drag on any longer, the regular customers of the restaurant will all run away. The innkeeper finally patted the waiter's shoulder. Probably because he found his conscience, he glared at the waiter and said, "In the future, if you let that old freeloader go on a long trip, don't secretly pay for it. The restaurant will pay for it." Without waiting for the waiter to flatter him, the innkeeper had already turned around and left with a hand on his chest. He muttered that his heart ached. "You can't be a good person. You can't be a good person." The waiter, who was crippled at a young age, looked at the side street and grinned. That day, the old storyteller who had been fixed in this restaurant all year round finally came back. Moreover, word spread like wildfire, and the restaurant was full on that day. Especially when the old man talked about one thing with joy, the entire restaurant roared with laughter. Even the innkeeper and the waitress were overjoyed. Everyone looked at the waiter surnamed Wen. Some of the rough men even held their stomachs and laughed so hard that they almost cried. The storyteller who had rushed back from the county town said that the #1 expert in the world was no longer Wang Xianji of the martial emperor's city of the Eastern Sea, but a young vassal king, the king of Beiliang, who had 300,000 Beiliang cavalry. This #1 expert in the world and Beimang's military god, a guy called Tuoba Bodhisattva, had a fierce fight in the western regions. The two top immortals in the world fought for thousands of miles. It was a fight that turned the sky and the earth upside down, and the sun and the moon lost their light. Among them, Li Yang's king of Beiliang had once beaten the most powerful guy of the Beimang dynasty out of the city with a single sword strike. If it wasn't thousands of steps, it should have been at least hundreds of steps. The city walls were like paper. Then, that young vassal king who had ascended to the top of the Jianghu personally said that he had learned that sword strike from a swordsman from the central plains called Wenhua. Therefore, amidst the laughter, there were nosy people who kept shouting at the top of their lungs, "Hey, hey, hey, when did you get close to the king of Beiliang? Otherwise, when will you take us to the northwest to see the power of the Beiliang cavalry?" Yes, 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 that's a prince. He should have a prince's mansion, right? Waiter, we'll take advantage of you. How about you take us to Beiliang tomorrow? It shouldn't be difficult to eat and drink well, right? Flying sword. Give me a flying sword. Waiter 1, since you can make that great prince admire you, you must have the flying sword skills from the romance novels. Why don't I break a stool leg for you, and you can take me flying? The lame young man who was standing in the restaurant's lobby was holding a jug of wine. For a moment, he forgot to pour wine for the guests. He didn't say anything and didn't answer, but he couldn't stop laughing. However, he really laughed until tears came to his eyes. At this moment, a guest who had finally realized that he hadn't received any wine after waiting for a long time slammed the table and roared, "Where's the wine? Do you really think you're the swordsman from the central plains that the prince talked about? Damn you!" The waiter suddenly lowered his head and lifted his crippled shoulder. He carelessly wiped away the tears on his face and laughed loudly. "Ah, sir, here's the wine." Chapter 1659. Su Fengnian stopped at Mount Qingliang for a short rest. Then, he led the light cavalry of the Phoenix Battalion toward the new city that had broken ground at the beginning of the year. Traveling with him were Su Beiji, who had just left his post as the provincial governor of Lingzhou, and Chen Shiliang, whose official rank in Liuzhou had always been neither high nor low. The woman who had previously died with him, the king of Beiliang, was his aunt, Xiao Yute, accompanying Su Weisheng. Chen Yu and the green-robed little girl hit it off very well and also stayed at Mount Qingliang. The two of them liked to throw copper coins of wishes at the wishing lotuses in Tidehark Lake. Jia and Su Ying, who had become playmates in Great Peace City, also began to go their separate ways when they arrived at Beiliang Palace. The girl liked to run with the two tiger kuei from the top of the mountain to the bottom of the mountain, and then from the front of the mountain to the back of the mountain. Only when she occasionally saw the woman called Lu Qingyan would she stop and laugh happily. Su Ying, on the other hand, liked to listen to the stories of Wang Chudong, a great literary figure in Liyang. In short, Mount Qingliang seemed to become lively all of a sudden. In particular, Chen Yu, who had competed with a certain Nangong for the top spot in the Rouge evaluation, only a few glimpses of her arrival were enough to shock people. Every time she stopped by Tidehark Lake for a stroll, if the Beiliang subordinates of Song Dongming and Baiyu noticed her with their sharp eyes, they would quickly spread the news. No matter how busy they were, they could shamelessly find some lame excuses to swarm to the railings of the small square outside the yamen to enjoy the scenery. Deputy Administrator Song turned a blind eye to this. He never made things difficult for or stopped these simple-minded young scholars. Although they had successfully thwarted Bailiang's invasion to the south, the construction of the new city never stopped. It could even be said that they worked day and night. The construction of the outer main wall rose up at a shocking speed that could be seen with the naked eye. This kind of spectacular scene inevitably required Bailiang to exhaust countless financial and material resources as a huge price. Thus, many scholars who went to Mount Qing cited classics and classics. They used the previous dynasty's capital of Dechu as examples. They all rested with the people for 30 days and did not delay the people's farming. Thus, they criticized Bailiang's actions as draining the pond to catch fish. The young and strong civil officials of Mount Qingliang, led by Bailiang's deputy administrator Song Dongming, sneered at this. Thus, it triggered a debate that quickly spread throughout Bailiang's scholarly circles. Then, in this large-scale written battle without gunpowder, the new city site was always in full swing. Other than Su Fengnian, who was only a general and a master craftsman in name, the two governors of the new city, the administrator Li Gongde and the master of Mo, the Liangzhou prefectural governor Wang Peifang, the 6 deputy supervisors, as well as the nearly 60,000 local garrison troops and the several 100,000 military laborers of the 3 prefectures in northern Liang Pass. Nobody paid any attention to the internal affairs of the pass. They paid no attention to the debate about whether or not the construction of the new city was a waste of manpower and wealth. Su Fengnian, Su Beiji, and Chen Shiliang rode side by side. Behind them were the happily chatting Su Yanbing and Groom Yu. Chen Shiliang, compared to when he first entered Mount Qing, was a fair and delicate scholar from Jiangnan. His hands holding the reins were full of calluses, and he had become a charcoal skinny villager. However, his eyes were bright, steady, and determined. At this time, he said to Su Fengnian, as long as Mount Qingliang can take out the silver, Liuzhou can immediately move 40,000 young and strong men to the new city. However, I hope that other than not owing them wages, you can also recognize their titles. Our Liuzhou people are suffering too much. Su Fengnian was in a difficult position. The silver, Su Beiji, who had been signaled with his eyes, rolled his eyes. Now, he was officially the transport envoy of Bailiang. He slowly said, after defeating the Bailiang barbarians, other than the soldiers' salaries and pensions, the military reward that was given out was close to 900,000 taels of silver. This was after Yan Wenluan, Yu Wandao, and the other border generals took the lead and asked not to accept any rewards. In the end, Mount Qingliang converted things like silk and stationery into silver and sent them out. Otherwise, the silver in Bailiang Palace's treasury would have been completely depleted. We can still squeeze out an extra 1,000,000 taels of silver from Lingzhou, but the matter of purchasing provisions has to be placed first. After all, the imperial court has yet to lift the ban on transporting grain, so it's not good for us to have too much hope. While the Lianghuai and Jinggan roads have finally relented with great difficulty, as long as the officials of Lingzhou have the means, they're all using public silver to buy provisions. Unless it's absolutely necessary, we can't touch Lingzhou's money. Chen Shiliang did not fly into a rage out of humiliation, but he did not give up either. He asked, if we don't want wages, would it be possible for the people of Liuzhou to exchange a year of labor for the title of Bailiang's official Yangzhou household register? Su Beiji thought for a while before shaking his head. Normally, it would be possible, but the war has just ended. Of the first batch of youths from Liuzhou who entered the remote cool border pass, only the 20,000 refugees who participated in the defense of Xiaoguang City and the slaughter at the Calabash Pass were given official household registers. Even the refugees outside the Liangzhou Pass who did not enter the battlefield have not received this treatment. If they could become Liangzhou citizens just by participating in the construction of the city, there would definitely be people who would be dissatisfied. Don't worry about scarcity, but worry about uneven distribution. This has always been the case. Chen Shiliang suddenly felt a surge of anger, but it was not directed at Su Beiji and Su Fengnian. He gazed at the distant yellow sands of the great desert, his lips tightly pursed. He thought of the battle to the death in Azure City. At the final juncture, just how many youths from Liuzhou had rushed over and charged into the battlefield, casually picking up the weapons of the Beiliang cavalry and the Beimang barbarians. Just like that, they had died in battle. Su Fingnian softly asked, Chen Shiliang, have you ever thought about the day when the population of Liuzhou, which has less than 300,000 people, will all be citizens of Beiliang's Liuzhou household register? There will be no need for them to risk their lives to obtain the citizenship of a different province. Chen Shiliang took a deep breath and said nothing. His eyes were absent-minded, as if he was looking forward to the arrival of that day. Many times, even the provincial governor of Liuzhou, Yang Guangdou, had joked that in all of Liuzhou, only Chen Shiliang, a foreigner who had only settled down for a few years, considered himself to be a citizen of Liuzhou. Su Beiji suddenly smiled and said, Your Highness, this pie of yours really doesn't cost a single copper coin. Compared to your extravagant spending in the past, you're much better at managing the household now. Su Fingnian laughed heartily. His arms were crossed over his chest, and he did not hold the reins. His body rose and fell with the bumpy ride of the horse, and his expression was rather contented. Chen Shiliang also smiled and agreed, You do have the posture of a thrifty housekeeper now. After Su Fingnian finished laughing, he turned his head and said teasingly, Shiliang, I know you don't care about being promoted, but this time, you have defended Qingcang and Liuzhou. Even if you don't take credit for it, at the very least, you can't run away from it. If you insist on not being promoted, what will your colleagues who should be happy about it do? You will be free, but they won't be free. Chen Shiliang shook his head and said, From the provincial governor's mansion and the Longxiang army to the soldiers of the 3 towns, you can reward me however you want. You don't have to worry about me. Liuzhou's officialdom is different from Liangzhou and Lingzhou. It doesn't have as many twists and turns as you imagine. Su Fingnian seemed to say casually, Provincial Governor Yang Guangdou himself knows that he won't stay in Liuzhou for too long. I also don't have the heart to let this old man stay outside the Great Wall and accompany you young officials who are in the prime of fighting. When the time comes, once the Battle of Liangmang ends and the border is settled, Liuzhou is destined to have a change of dynasty. Not only will the scholars in Beiliang be crying piteously for food, even the local officials of Beiliang from the 3 provinces will be envious. In the future, Liuzhou will be a place that must be passed through to connect Liang with the western regions, and it will also be an important transit point. Right now, the officials in Liuzhou are worthless, but in the future, they might be even richer than Lingzhou in Jiangnan. When Provincial Governor Yang leaves and returns to Liangzhou to be the deputy administrator or something, he will retire. When that time comes, you old men, in Liuzhou's officialdom and the 200,000 to 300,000 refugees will be like a group of dragons without a leader. Aren't you worried? Chen Shiliang fell into silence. Su Beiji changed the topic and said with schadenfreude, Our Beiliang's god of fortune is said to have traveled to every inch of land in Liangzhou and Liuzhou in just 2 short years. He also holds the position of the deputy administrator of the new city. This time, he suddenly caught a cold and is recuperating at home.